What if Naruto traveled to HighSchool DxD Part 3? The fanfiction is by Kurizero Kishi. Links to the story and author will be in the description.
Endgame, Vera Chapter 4. The Weight of Emotions. Disclaimer, I don't own anything. Don't own HighSchool Dragons of Dragons or Naruto. I do own the concepts and plots that I introduced into the story. Also, because of the connection between HighSchool DxD and multiple religions and myths, I am sorry if I have accidentally written something wrong and offended someone's belief/faith etc. I just did some basic research and filled the holes in by myself, so it is only natural if I get something wrong. Endgame, tell me again, why exactly am I wearing this monkey suit? Naruto asked grumpily, plucking at the stiff black suit, when everybody else is wearing school uniforms. Rias grinned at him as she drew her cloak around her tightly. Yours was already ready beforehand. I just didn't have the time to order theirs. Besides, you look dangerous. Naruto ignored her smoldering gaze. A dangerous penguin is still a penguin. The blonde mumbled before he sighed. Placing one hand on Rias' back, a faint smile touched his lips. Are you ready? As ready as I'll ever be. I've thought of every loophole that I could, every exception and then some. She worried her lips and gave him a reproachful look. Kiba and I still haven't stopped jumping at loud noises either. That's good. It means they're aware of their surroundings. Naruto commented blandly. She chuckled, true. Then let's go. Wait, tugging him back, she reached up and started messing with his tie again, much to the blonde's annoyance. It's fine, right? Wait. What is it? Her hands flickered until they were looped around his neck, then she pulled his face towards hers until the blonde calmly placed a finger over her lips. I'm sorry, he said softly with an obscure pain in his eyes. Oh. Her head bowed for a moment and her red bangs shrouded her eyes before she simply placed her forehead on her chest. Can I at least, thank you? What for? For coming. Her eyes met his curious one and she continued, you didn't have to come at all, and I would not have forced you. Rias whispered into his coat, before you came, we could have won only through a minor miracle, but now, I can actually see a very real chance at winning this. Even if I had to break Kiba and eyes in the process? Rias grinned humorously, I'm sure you'll fix them afterwards. It might involve liberal application of pain and fear. Naruto remarked gravely. She outright laughed. Outside the door, Koneko smirked before she knocked on the door. Buku? Pushing it open without permission, her smirk widened at the two of them. Someone wants to see you. She softly said without any preamble. Rias simply sent the smaller girl a questioning look that was returned with a blank one before she stepped aside to allow another person to peek through the door with a wide grin. At first glance, the tall, handsome-looking man with long hair every bit as crimson as Rias' own crown of flaming hair cascading down his back, seemed like a simple businessman who was barely past 30. On the surface, that is. Naruto's own instincts were already blaring like it once did 3 years ago, alerting him to the monstrous level of energy carefully hidden underneath the unassuming exterior. It matched, if not outright exceeded the one he had felt in Sirafal's adult form. Rias. The man said with pleasure as Rias' eyes went wide and she promptly hurled herself at him. Uncaring of his own expensive-looking business suit, the tall man intercepted Rias mid-flight with a loud laugh and swung the much smaller girl around. Ni-sama. Why are you here? How could I not be here for my dear sister's first ever rating game? The man retorted easily. The two of had fell into an easy, comfortable flow of conversation as they walked to where the rest of the pieces waited for them, Koneko and Naruto following behind with a comfortable silence between them. When they entered with a loud bang, mostly because the older Gremory had wanted to surprise his sister's peerage with a large smile, Naruto had winced. The handsome man with long crimson hair had greeted Akeno with a familiar fondness and a warm hug. The same had been extended to Asia, minus the hug. Then he had turned to the two only other males of Rias' peerage, and the results of Naruto's training could not have been more evident if he had slapped a billboard onto their foreheads. Kiba had jumped the moment the door had opened and hit the wall with a loud bang, and then bounced of it to attach himself to the ceiling with his swords and wild look in his eyes as they swiveled around the room, looking like a remarkably demented, yellow-furred spider with bladed limbs. The style that had taken form under the constant pressure of the blonde's training was evident. No matter how much he tried, he would never be able to tank a direct hit from Naruto without crippling himself in the process. Forged by the heat of battle, his blades had thinned until they were nearly rapiers, but not quite as small, while still retaining their sharpness and durability. Where he once blocked, he now deflected. His first instinct was to use his superior speed to put distance between him and his opponent to judge them, before moving in like a flash for a one-hit kill without any of the flashy posturing he was used to doing. When he had first done it, The taller blonde had stared at him and asked him what the hell he was doing. Kiba had replied that battles were supposed to be flowing, as beautiful as the swords he had wielded. His teacher had promptly disabused him of that particular notion by snapping him in half like a twig until he was kissing his own crotch. As far as motivation went, it was a surprisingly effective one. On the other side of the room, Aiza's gauntlet had appeared with a flash of crimson draconic steel, and the dark-haired boy had folded into himself, fitting as much of his bulk behind the gauntlet with one crazed eye peeking out from between the gaps of his makeshift shield. Like Kiba, Aiza had quickly formed his own style. Unlike Kiba, Aiza recognized that he would never be quite as fast Kiba even if he tried. So in the flames of battle, he had turned a weakness into strength. He had learned early on that his advantage had been his tenacity, and due to the nature of his boosted gear, the longer a battle dragged on, the more powerful he got, but the question had always been whether or not he could last long enough to be a viable threat. It was only after Naruto had smashed his ribs for the 100th time that the exasperated blonde had pointed out to somewhat dense eyes that he wore armor on his arm, and if said armor had managed to take a blow from him without even cracking, why the hell wasn't he using it? So he had employed the boosted gear's surprisingly tough exterior like a shield. He had lost count how many times he had broken his right hand in the first 3 days, but by the end of the 4th, he was tanking the blonde's furious punches with the best of them, presenting as little as his soft, vulnerable flesh as possible and biding his time until an opening showed itself, and then he would strike. And more often than not, one punch was all he needed. The bemused man had stared at the two crazed-looking boys, and the two wild-eyed boys stared back at him, fingers twitching as they watched him for any threatening moves. Is that normal? Akeno, who had been watching the three of them, had burst out in a loud, completely undignified laugh until she fell off her chair, and somewhere far away, Naruto could vaguely hear the shattering of 1,000 wet dreams. Even Rias could not suppress a resigned chuckle before pointing a finger at the innocently whistling blonde behind her. It's his fault. Everyone else agreed with nods. The taller man leveled an amused look at the third year that had his hands lazily stuffed in his pockets. Uzumaki-san. It's been a while, hasn't it? Crystalline blue met crimson red for a brief moment. Naruto was the first to break eye contact with a faint nod and a lazy wave. About 3 years, I'd say. Then the man who had attained the position of Lucifer calmly strode over to the blonde in the equally expensive-looking suit and extended a hand along with an openly warm smile. I suppose I'll have to thank you then. The Uzumaki accepted the handshake without a word. Will you walk with me for a moment? Sirzechs asked politely. It was a request, not an order, from one who was good at concealing his nature from the world to another. Both of them chose to ignore Rias' worried look as they left the room silently. As the two of them ambled down the hallways silently, their differences could not have been more obvious. Where Sirzechs' posture was upright, the blonde was slouched. Where a simple, noble pride emanated from the crimson-haired man, Naruto seemed to leak an air of someone who could not care less. Where the Lucifer's hands were folded neatly, the former assassin's arms were lazily stuffed in his pocket. That said, Sirzechs wasn't fooled by the lazy posture at all. He was more than sure that the blonde's muscles were tensed and fully ready to slash him at a moment's notice like a coiled snake. I think I have to apologize for the fact that this was necessary at all in the first place. The wedding arrangement was not my idea, but my father's. The older man sighed. Razor is not a bad person, but he can certainly do without some of his more unpleasant tendencies. None of which are any of my concern. The blonde pointed out with an agreeable smile. And yet you help them train, you help them get stronger. And from what I just saw in there, they are far stronger than I believed possible in such a short time. Sirzechs noted blandly, from the letters and the times we have spoken, Rias has expressed many times about how you refuse to take the initiative. Yet here you are. Why the sudden change of heart? There was no any hint of recrimination or accusation in his words, just a simple curiosity. I was paid to help. That is all. Does that mean I can look forward to seeing you take a more active part in the match? The assassin's lips twitched. Do not misunderstand. I was paid to help assist her pieces in getting stronger, not take part in the battle. How that affects her and Razor is not my problem. I'm not sure I understand that there's a difference. Sirzechs admitted. Naruto shrugged. The difference is that she has already made her own choice. And now she wants to fight for that by herself. He smiled neutrally. No one needs to protect her ability to make her own choices now. They only need to help her find the strength within her to keep walking the path of her own choosing. That had always been the essence of his oath, the culmination of everything he had learned in war, the crystallization of his faith in people. They had thought he had fought for peace, they had thought he had fought against evil, they had thought he was defying a deluded God. They had thought wrong. He was protecting the people's ability to choose their own paths, even if that meant that they would walk down the path of self-destruction, even if it meant that they accepted a world of dreams. He would agree with it, but he would smile, and he would accept. It was only logical that the next step of that ability to choose would be to fight for their own choices to be heard and acknowledged. His task then would not be to protect them, but to guide them. Their gazes locked. This time, Crimson Red was the first to turn away from the faith contained within those blue orbs that were as clear as the sky above them. I think I can see why Graphia, my wife, was rather impressed by you. He finally said softly. She was? Naruto dryly noted, I didn't notice. I was too busy being worried about how I was going to defrost my testicles. I've noticed she tends to have that kind of effect on men, Sirzechs agreed with a wince and a loving smile, but I doubt you will need to worry about your testicles. There was a pause as Sirzechs tried to find the right words for what he wanted to say. She believes them to be so big and brassy they are probably impervious to ice. The blonde quirked an eyebrow at him and Sirzechs momentarily paused to admire at exactly how much sarcasm the blonde had managed to convey in that one move. It was practically dripping off his body language even without him saying a word, so he decided to elaborate. You were the first person to so blatantly defy her like that, in several centuries if I might add, and then you proceeded to insult her and her family's honor to boot. She thought it was refreshing. Among other things. Naruto rolled his eyes at the dreamy smile plastered on the man's face. I don't want to know. I don't want to know, he repeatedly muttered to himself like a mantra. I do not want to know if Rias is going to have another niece or nephew in 9 months. Sirzechs sent him a perverse smile. Of course, there's also the fact that Rias would have been upset with her if she had removed her future favorite toy. To the Devil Lord's consternation, instead of blushing and denying it like most teenagers tended to do when faced with issues related to romance, the blonde face instantly clammed up tighter than a bank vault. Where he could at least detect a modicum of the blonde's thoughts through his expressions before, there was nothing but a wall of cold steel now. He pondered the boy's steely visage for a moment before he came to his own conclusion. I apologize. You already have someone you love. Had. Naruto amended with a steely edge in his tone. I'm sorry for your loss. The blonde smiled, a bitter line etched onto his stony expression. The Devil Lord merely placed one reassuring hand on the younger man's shoulder. Naruto turned a blank gaze onto the man beside him and nodded, a slight flicker of gratefulness in his eyes. Maybe it was the way the Devil Lord seemed to certain, and so much wiser than he, maybe it was the reassuring presence of someone who he could finally talk to unreservedly, but he finally spoke. She confessed to me before the war honestly started. It was the first time something like that ever happened to me, and I did not know how to react. Naruto finally admitted softly, my life was not a pleasant one even before that, and I did not know how to deal with it. By the time I had gathered my courage to at least thank her, and perhaps see if we could make something about it. The war had already started in earnest. Naruto's eyes glazed over as he lost himself in his memories. He had not spoken about this to anybody before, carrying the pain of regret within him the entire time without flinching. It was a burden he didn't know he had been carrying until now. And then I could not tell her for a wholly different reason. I had always known that the chance that I would be lost in battle was too high. I accepted it and I defied it with blood, sweat and tears. I would not give her hope and then have it ripped from her. So I swore I would not say those words to her until I ended the war. The blonde merely shrugged with an obscure pain reflected in his eyes. I succeeded at the cost of my own happiness. If he could not give her his heart, then at least he could give her a chance to live in a peaceful world. Sirzechs did not say anything. It was not that he did not know what to say, he had seen much, and experienced even more himself. So he knew that no words were enough for something like that. Instead he gripped the younger boy's shoulder a little tighter, and they walked back to the room in silence. As the two of them parted ways, Naruto looked back when he heard someone call his name. Turning back, he glanced at Sirzechs who still had his back to him as he innocently admired some flowers. I know you do not plan to interfere, but let's say that hypothetically someone wished to pull Razor's head out of his ass, it would need to be sufficiently flashy, if you understand what I mean. Razor may be an arrogant, despicable lecher, but his overly inflated self-importance is not entirely unwarranted. He is genuinely strong in his own right. Sirzechs paused to grin somewhat dreamily. I can see the attraction in beating in his face with fists alone just to prove to him that his power is not as invincible as he thinks it is, but to someone as egotistic as him, he would not be able to accept it. He would only see it as cheating and perhaps use his influence to override the results of the match. So anything this hypothetical person would need to do, would have to be rather ostentatious. I'll be sure to pass your advice on should I meet this hypothetical person. Naruto replied dryly. Endgame Rias glanced to her side worriedly where the blonde was staring out at nothing. His gaze looked like it was 1,000 miles away even as he idly thumbed away at the ear receiver that had been given to each of them earlier. It was not that she was worried that he would not be able to fight, she had already known that the blonde would not participate. He was only here as an observer. And as strange as it was, she actually found herself simply worrying about him because he wasn't his usual sardonic self rather than the fact that he would not be helping. Steeling herself, she pushed away her thoughts as she felt the approaching figures. To the side, even Naruto narrowed his eyes as he felt 16 separate presences coming. All of them were lines up with Razor directly in the middle, his arms casually placed on the waists of two extraordinarily beautiful women, his queen and the girl in the elegant-looking kimono. Naruto was somewhat amused to note that they seemed to be walking like they were attending a high-class fashion show. "Ho? You added another member, huh?" The flashy phoenix's eyes landed on the other blonde who was dressed in a sharp suit. "I guess it can't be helped if you were so desperate. At least you found someone that looks somewhat more reliable than the other trash you have there." His sneer widened, though it won't make a difference in the end. Rias opened her mouth to say something, but before she could greet her opponent, the Uzumaki suddenly interrupted her. "Ma," he gave the phoenix a warm and friendly smile. It was so warm and friendly that the entire ORC group stepping away from him with fear. Kiba and Eyes had already disappeared up the nearest trees. After making sure it wasn't going to explode randomly, that is. When Naruto smiled like that, it generally meant someone was about to suffer and they didn't really want to get caught in whatever the blonde was about to do. "It's just an unofficial rating game, so let's just have a good game, right?" Razor sneered at the hand the blonde extended and made to knock it away. He had no intention of making friends with a commoner after all. However, the Uzumaki simply caught his fist with a firm grasp before Razor could slap his hand away. "That's not very nice, you know. I just wanted to be friends." "Unhand me, dog," Razor spat as he ripped his hand from Naruto's grasp before suddenly wincing. He glanced at the tiny cut on the back of his hand. "You." Turning around, he immediately stomped away as elegantly as he could while his peerage simultaneously sent glares at him for daring to even scratch their master. Placing one hand on his hip, Naruto let a small smirk touch his lips as he watched them leave. "He's a thoroughly unpleasant person, isn't he? I thought Sona would have told you about him already." Rias observed with a mild sigh as she ordered the rest of the ORC to return to their base now that the opening ceremony was over. "She did." He shrugged in response as he fell in step with them, "but I'm not in the habit of making assumptions about someone before I personally see and hear it from both sides. Besides, when all of this is over, you might be feeling somewhat different about him." Ring, the school bell echoed loudly in that empty world, causing all of them to share a look, and Rias ruthlessly shoved aside her curiosity about his cryptic words as she refocused on the large, holographic map hovering before her. As everybody filtered out of the room in order to mentally prepare and wait for their orders, Rias turned to her desk and waved her hand. "As per our plan, the first target that we'll be going for is Razor's pawn, since they will be a lot of trouble if they can promote into queens, but more important than that is the battlefield. Positioning our pieces will be the deciding factor in the game, just like normal chess. Since the old school building is our territory and Razor's territory is in the new school building, Issei, Koneko and Yuto will be heading for the gym. It's the middle ground and direct route between our two sides. Whoever captures it first will have the high ground." She ordered into her earpiece. 3 dots that had been waiting outside their room immediately began moving, and a large display screen beside the map showed the 3 of them running towards the large building in the center of the map. "Akeno," Rias said calmly as she watched the large hologram of the school, "please prepare a large number of traps around the old school building, particularly in choke points, and then head over to help Issei and the rest." The raven-haired princess bowed with a beatific smile and her wings unfurled with a large gust of wind. Just before she took off, Rias saw her smile twist into a sadistic one, and she suddenly started pitying whoever got caught in her traps. They watched as the 3 of them, Eyes, Koneko and Yuto, approached and entered the gym when a group of 6 dots suddenly burst through the wall, obviously expecting to ambush Rias pieces with surprise and force of numbers on their side. It might have worked better if they hadn't made such a loud entrance. Playback con, strike back. None of them had managed to even utter a single sound before a wild-eyed Eyes simply batted a chainsaw away with his gauntlet and punched its wielder, one of the Lolly twins, right back through a wall, blasting another hole beside the one she had made earlier, immediately knocking the first pawn out and drawing first blood before drop-kicking her sister through the ceiling. Rias' eyes widened at that, then she sweat dropped. "You know, I'm not sure which one I'm more surprised at. That Eyes can already hit that hard even without boosting, or the fact that he even didn't stop to perv at them first." Behind her, Naruto, who had pulled his gaze back onto the screen, let his lips curl into a faint smile. When he had said he would be putting them through the same training Tsunade had put him through, he had not been joking. The training had been developed specifically for him and him alone by taking into consideration the fact that he had absolutely zero patience or talent for chakra control and medical ninjutsu, as well as take advantage of his innate durability by carving its very principles into his body with her stupidly huge strength. Naturally, he had neglected to mention that little fact to Aiz or Kiba. They would probably go ballistic if they found out. That said, it did not change the fact that those very same principles were also engraved into their bodies now, or at least the basics were. Whether or not it was enough for them to combine it all and develop it to the point where they were capable of reproducing his grandmother's prized strength was up to them and them alone. Then again, if the faint surging he had felt as Aiz had almost unconsciously focused his energy into a pinpoint, ironically in the gem on his gauntlet, then released it in one blow was any indication, it was probably only a matter of time. It was somewhat crude, unrefined and wasted too much energy, but he was getting there. The remaining two pawns, the elegant-looking bishop and the rook, gaped at the hole in the wall and the ground before said rook, who was wearing a traditional Chinese dress, roared in anger, "I don't know how you did that, but you're going to pay." She never managed to tell them exactly how they were going to pay for it because Kiba had already rammed one of his swords down her throat. "Shh." The maniacally smiling swordsman whispered almost soothingly into the dying girl's ears, "Talking is bad 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 bad." Back with Rias and Naruto, the crimson-haired princess rubbed her temples wearily. "You can fix them, right?" The blonde simply shrugged with a grin. "I'm thinking I might actually leave them like that." "What? Why?" "Because it's hilarious." In the gym, Aiz's nose twitched as he smelt ozone. "Kiba." The world around them erupted in flames as the gym itself collapsed into rubble. Immediately, 3 announcements popped up as Razor's bishop and 2 pawns retired in quick succession along with the Gremmery's lone rook, causing the bomb queen hovering in the air above them to click her tongue in annoyance. Despite her sneak attack, she had only been able to get one person. For someone of her abilities, it was practically a failure. Just then, a tower of ice burst out of the ground, revealing 2 figures inside who were panting. Kiba had his swords out, evidently the source of their icy shield, while a singed Aiz had one gauntlet placed on Kiba's back to supply him with enough strength to create the fortress of frozen water. "Kiba, too," Aiz muttered tersely. The swordsman nodded, understanding that the dragon wielder needed another 2 minutes before he was ready to go again after expanding all his energy into protecting both of them, and immediately darted off to scout the area around them. During training, the 2 of them had quickly realized that alone, neither of them stood a chance of even touching the Uzumaki with their current abilities, and had quickly adapted and had developed a somewhat workable communication system in order to corner the maniac who was training them. Their lives had literally depended on it after all. Aiz quickly darted into cover and dropped back onto his haunches as he hid behind a rock before almost instinctively scanning the area. Glancing up into the sky where he knew the bomb queen would be waiting and saw her fighting a battle for air superiority with a figure with raven locks and equally black wings, the boy grimaced again and leaned back to heal. Naruto was not going to be happy with him. Despite everything Naruto had pounded into them, he had been a split second too late in warning Kiba and saving Koneko. Nope. He was not going to be happy. Endgame oi. Come here. The 2 boys who had been taking in deep gulps of air shared a fearful look before they hesitantly pulled themselves up and practically crawled over to the small fire where a blonde was sitting. Naruto casually slipped on a pair of glasses and shuffled through a thick set of papers before he separated them into 2 stacks. Then he placed 1 stack in front of each boy. "We're stopping training a bit earlier today." He briefly glanced at the sky once more as the 2 boys nearly cried in relief. His eyes glinted before he proceeded to break their hopes with a grin. "Of course, that doesn't mean I don't have anything for the 2 of you to do." He gestured at the 2 stacks of documents. "Read those and memorize them in 1 hour. You may sleep after that." Aiz immediately went pale and recoiled from the huge stack of papers. "What are these? Homework? That's what you're worried about?" Naruto shot back incredulously. Beside him, Kiba furrowed his brows as he began to quickly page through his own stack. "These are profiles on Razor's peerage, aren't they?" He blinked as he read through their basic stats, their skills and their preferences, and felt his jaw drop. The handwritten notes had even gone as far as listing down possible scenarios in which their skills could be used and how to counter them. How in the world did you get something like this? What in the world did you think I was doing in those 5 days I wasn't here?" The blonde asked casually. He folded his legs and leaned back on a tree. "I was checking out your opponents and their fighting styles. Knowledge is power after all." The 2 of them goggled at the reclining blonde as said blonde reminded himself to do something nice for the Sidri sisters. When he had requested access to their family library, he hadn't exactly been truthful with them. While the information in there would definitely be useful in his endeavors, his main priority had actually been to infiltrate to the Phoenix household in the underworld. He had simply chosen not to mention that part to them. As the blonde continued to languish on the branch, he lazily gestured at the stack of papers. As you can see, there's a pattern amongst his peerage. Razor is the kind of person that prioritizes looks over abilities, mostly because he doesn't consider them to be anything more than cannon fodder to reduce the amount of people he has to fight in the end. He continued with a bland smile that failed to hide the cold amusement in his eyes. To be honest, I have absolutely no idea how he is considered a top player in the rating game with those kind of stats and pieces, so I am either severely overestimating the other devils, or he's paying them off for wins. He gave them both a very pointed look. In fact, if you two manage to survive this little training of mine and still don't manage to defeat his entire peerage, save him and his queen, before they take out one piece, I'm going to be very disappointed with the both of you. I scratched his head with some confusion. I get the part about the fried chicken, but why his queen as well? The two of them leaned forward with interest as the blonde folded his fingers together, his chilly gaze zeroing in on the papers in their hands, because, out of all his pieces, the only one I consider to be any real threat is his queen. Their eyes were instantly drawn downwards as they quickly paged to the queen's profile. Airlock? Eyes murmured as he scanned the document. A sacred gear that gives her an ability to control air, I suppose. Oxygen to be exact. Kiba remarked softly as he finished reading the notes faster than Eyes had. I've seen her fight before, but I never realized that's how her fire spells got so damn powerful. That is correct. Naruto gave them an approving look. Yuba Luna was considered a prodigy at fire spells when she was younger. However, shortly after she was turned into a devil, she discovered she had a sacred gear that allowed her to increase the concentration of oxygen anywhere within her line of sight in order to explosively increase the power of her fire spells. Together with her affinity for them and her precise aim, she managed to attain the title of Bomb Queen within a mere 6 months of being converted. Kiba smiled thinly. That's going to be really hard to fight. The other blonde merely cocked his head. Not really. It's quite easy when you know what to look for. Eyes gave him a hopeful look. You have a way of dodging this? Why, yes, I do. Naruto smiled warmly. In fact, I'm going to teach it to you in exactly 6 hours, at dawn. Why do I suddenly feel cold? Huh? You feel it too? Both of them suddenly leapt up and started running away from the blonde. Naruto began to idly pick his nose as he gazed up at the stars. I wonder if I should have told them that I planted bombs all over the forest? Not too far away, he heard a massive explosion followed by 2 screams. Casually, he jumped off the branch and indolently kicked a sharp rock out of the way. Pulling out a pocket watch from a pocket, the former assassin flipped it open and glanced at the time, then slipped it back into his pocket before humming to himself for a moment. Precisely a second later, he stepped aside before 2 smoking bodies falling from the sky hit the ground directly where he had been standing. You should have said that earlier, you bastard. The blackened lump on the left shook a fist at him. What kind of nut job brings explosives with him for a training trip? The one on the right waved a middle finger at him. The Uzumaki felt his lips twitch upwards. Oh? You two are still alive? Good, good. The blood visibly drained from their faces even under the soot as he leered at them. This bastard is happy that the two of you are so enthusiastic about getting stronger that you ran off before he could even tell you what his plan was. In fact, this nut job is so happy that he's going to triple the amount and lethality of the bombs he planted as a reward for your enthusiasm. There were 2 thuds as the still sizzling boys fainted flat on their faces. Endgame, is she all right? Naruto asked blandly as his head stuck out the window. He found himself strangely worried for the reticent little girl who had been the only one so far not to expect anything from him other than a cup of tea. She'll be sore for a while, a pale Rias replied. There was some damage that was transferred over from the simulation, but more often than not it is not permanently debilitating. In here, even if someone cuts your head off, you will be fine. Of course, Razor is a different story. Because of his immortality, that rule doesn't apply to him, and as such, a special kind of field had to be used. Even if you blow his body to pieces, the system will not register it as a loss as he will keep coming back. She seemed to sag a little as if simply acknowledging that advantage the opponent had over them sapped her strength, so we can only win if we can make him voluntarily surrender. That's how he has always won his fights. To him, his pieces are expendable and only serve to reduce the amount of people he will need to inevitably fight. That's what the training trip was for. I could easily devise any number of strategies around that advantage, but none of it would matter if my pieces lacked the basic strength to carry them out. So why was I not allocated somewhere? You've made it abundantly clear that you refuse to take a more active role in this, so keeping you in here was the best alternative. Rias replied curtly at the blonde who was lounging on the sofa with an indolent expression on his face. So it has nothing to do with the way you keep trying to avoid telling anyone exactly which piece was used to resurrect me? Said blonde idly smiled at the girl who had gone completely stiff. I am aware it was neither a knight nor a pawn. From my experiments, it clearly wasn't a rook either, which was the last free piece you had left. So what exactly did you do to turn me into a devil? Her eyes slowly closed and she grimaced as if in physical pain from his words. I should have expected this sooner or later. Though I will admit I was hoping for later. I've found that unpleasant topics such as this are usually best dealt with early. The blonde noted conversationally, the earlier the better. Rias nodded, accepting the advice for what it really was, a chastisement. As soon as the rating match ends. She promised. Very well. The blonde acquiesced, I will take my leave until then. What? She spun around to glare at him, but the blonde wasn't around anymore. In fact, the room was empty. Rias winced, fully aware that while Naruto had a tendency to wander off at the most important of times, he usually came back. She only hoped that would remain true after they talked. Endgame. Kiba grunted in annoyance as he deflected the dagger of the knight, throwing her guard wide open before he bashed her chest plate with his shoulder. Even then it was barely dented, evidence that her armor was obviously one of the highest quality. But then he hadn't really expected to deal any damage. His aim had been to unbalance her, and he considered the slight pain that ebbed in his left shoulder a small price to pay as Ice took the opening he had gave him to bury an armored fist in her stomach, sending her flying into the trees. That's 2 down. Ice noted amidst his heavy pants. Kiba glanced aside briefly even as he kicked Ice away from him, causing a bolt of fire to miss his head. 5 to go. He observed grimly even as he ducked under the last remaining knight. A long-haired woman with her face half obscured by a white mask and 3 pawns began to circle around him. His dual blades flashed rapidly, forming an almost invisible wall of sharpened demonic steel as he tried his best to defend against onslaught of attacks from the 2 maids, the girl with the staff, the stripper and the knight wielding a large Zweihandar. It was proof of the skill he had gained from the 5 days in the forest that not a single hit landed anything more than a scratch. The sharpness of his swordplay was of an entirely different level from before, with no wasteful movements whatsoever. Out of the 4 people attacking him, it had ironically been the staff wielder to land the first welting blow on his side, while the long-haired knight could only gnash her teeth uselessly as her big heavy attacks were easily evaded or deflected despite her speed. The less said about the 2 maid uniform wearing pawns and their stripper friend the better. Naruto had been right. From his perspective, the 3 of were simply flailing away blindly in the hope of hitting something in order to create an opening for the rest of their team. Kiba. The blonde swordsman didn't even miss a beat as his sharp thin blades evaporated as he smoothly transitioned into 2 ice blue blades that he plunged into the ground. Spikes of ice instantly erupted from the ground around them and pierced the 3 pawns, immobilizing them, but the other 2 were skillful enough that they had only sustained light scratches. A faint smile touched his lips as Kiba leapt backwards. The ice wasn't meant to hurt them. It had been meant to stop them from dodging. Something they were currently finding out as they tried to find purchase on the icy ground while a shadow made itself apparent as a figure rocketed downwards. Guillotine drop. There was a huge explosion of broken ice, dust and earth as the crimson gauntlet smashed into the earth with enough force to crack the ground and send pillars of displaced rock rising into the sky. Kiba panted heavily as he dropped to one knee while 4 rapid announcements popped up around the field telling them that they had managed to defeat the 3 pawns and the knight. But even then he managed to lift one hand and bump fists with the equally exhausted eyes as he limped out from the mushroom cloud of dust with one arm hanging uselessly. You finally managed to finish it? Hardly, he grunted, I'm using nearly 5 times of what Shisho does but the power isn't even half as large as his. Even then, the impact still dislocates my arm each time I try to use it. Eyes grit his teeth as he snapped his dislocated left arm back into place his shoulder socket with a loud crack. And that, Kiba pointed at his left shoulder with a wry smile, is why I'm just going to stick to my swords. I simply returned the smile with a pained grin of his own. Yeah, but unlike you, I don't have the benefit of a built-in weapon system, so I have to make do. I wonder what Sensei's going to say when he finds out you've been trying to copy his technique? Chances are he already knows. The first year pointed out, besides, he only said he wasn't going to teach us any new techniques. He never said we couldn't learn by watching him. Kiba was about to shoot something back, hopefully something sarcastic sounding, but he forgot about it as a flash of blue caught his eye. Almost instinctively, he tackled the dark-haired boy out of the way, knocking him back into the cloud of dust as a bolt of bright blue lightning buried itself into his gut. Gah! Kiba! Biting his lips to distract himself from the pain, Kiba snatched the blade of ice as it flew out of the cloud of debris where he had left it for eyes and spun around once before he collapsed on the ground, throwing it like a discus. The blade of deadly whirling metal flew through the brush before a girly screech of pain told him that his blade had landed true, and at the very least he had managed to disable the bishop. Kiba! You stupid piece of shit, Prince. The first-year boy flew out of the settling dust cloud and skidded to a stop beside the bleeding blonde. Uncaring of his already ragged uniform, Eyes felt his mouth go dry as he stared at the fist-sized hole in Yuatu's side. Why did you go and do that? His pupils dilated as he racked his brains trying to figure out what to do when he thought of Asia, who was still waiting with Buku. Hold on, I'll get you to Asia. She can do something about this. Kiba drew in a shaky breath and nodded as he tried not to look at the hole in his abdomen when he saw something glinting over Eyes' shoulder. The second-year student opened his mouth but nothing came out. It felt like his throat had already gone completely numb. Closing his eyes, he drew a deep breath, then proceeded to ignore the sheer pain as every bone in his body protested at the movement. Surging upwards, he shoved the younger boy out of the way for the third time that day. Ooh! Clang! Kiba growled as he shoved his sword deeper through the weak spot in the knight's armor and twisted it around, causing the knight to cry out in pain even as she stumbled backwards with a gleaming sword poking out of her chest and onto her back before disappearing in a shower of crystals. Razor Phoenix's knight has retired. Kiba coughed out a mouthful of blood as he wobbled around on shaky feet before pitching forwards until he felt someone catch him. That's the third time I saved your idiot ass. Not bad for a stupid piece of shit PR prince, huh? He wheezed out with a pained grin. Yo, you idiot. Kiba closed his eyes and slowly shook his head. No, not idiot. Already wounded. No point. Both hurt. He relaxed in Eyes' arms. I guess that's about as far as I go. Eyes bit her lips, his mind was completely blank. He didn't even know what to say, what he could say. I'm sorry. I show. A bloodied hand reached up and weakly slapped him, causing Eyes to jerk back with surprise. Enough. The second-year student shook his head again. You are the only one left. Just make sure we win. And I'll call it even, eh? Eyes bit his lips and nodded as he grasped the bloody fist tightly, trying his best to hold back his tears. I'll do everything I can. He promised. Yuatu smiled faintly and nodded once before Eyes was left holding nothing but a fistful of glowing crystals. Rias Gremory's knight has retired, KHH. Eyes wiped away his tears, uncaring of the blood that smeared his face, and slowly stood up again. Just wait for me, you stupid prince. I'm going to with this and then rub it in your face. He glanced at the old school building which the ORC was using as their base and began to trudge in that direction when he heard a small groan. Pulling up his gauntlet, his eyes roamed the area before they landed on a hint of yellow lying amongst burnt black and dirty brown. Warily, he approached the figure and quirked one brow as angry amber eyes glared back at him from behind a half-destroyed wall. The bishop's originally elegant dress and immaculately ringed bright yellow hair were both torn and dirtied, while a deep red stain slowly spread across her side where the blade of an icy blue sword had nearly sheared her torso in half. Eyes winced at the sight of her flesh as he slowly lowered his guard. Even if she wanted to, it was obvious that the bishop couldn't do much more than stay alive at this point. What? Pitying me? The bishop spat out angrily. Just end this already. He pinched the bridge of his nose before throwing the old school building in the distance another wistful look. I'm not stupid. He finally wearily replied, I know you're a phoenix too. If I do that, you'll just come back in perfectly full health and attack me. He sighed. Besides, even if you're an enemy, I just can't bring myself to hurt someone who's already injured as badly as you. Why? Ravel countered suspiciously despite her flushed cheeks. I hurt your friend. Eyes shrugged as he knelt beside the girl with a grimace at the huge rend in her side. It's a rating game, so he should be fine. But we trained so hard to protect our king and we promised our teacher we'd last till the end. It's just a little painful to see him taking the entire burden on himself and then going off on his own like that. Ravel quietly listened with a wary glint in her eyes as the boy tore off his shirt and carefully wrapped it around her side. I can't heal you, and I don't know how to remove that sword without doing any more damage, but that should stop you from bleeding out here for now, Eyes murmured as he inspected his handiwork. Then he slipped his hands under hers and gingerly lifted her small body up. WHA, what are you doing? Hold still, you idiot, I scolded her as she began wriggling in his arms with a bright red face despite her grievous wounds. You're going to hurt yourself even more like that. Erg. Ravel went silent, reluctantly leaning into his very naked and equally sweat chest. For such a lean body, he had a surprising amount of muscles. Endgame play Deus Ex Machina, the truth a dark silhouette made his way through the forests, alone as he watched the battle from the shadows. He was not afraid of being found at all. In fact, it would probably be more accurate to say that the shadows would shield him from their scrying spells. Slipping his hands into his pockets, the blonde in the suit casually leaned against a tree trunk and watched the ongoing battle in the skies above them. Faint flashes of lightning and explosions marred the sky even as jet black pinions scythed through the air. Again and again he told himself that there was no reason to join the fight, and so the blonde remained hidden in the shadows, calmly watching with a detached air. So you're really not going to join? The question sounded a lot more like a statement, so the blind simply smiled vaguely at the apparition floating beside him. Instead of wasting your power talking, shouldn't you be keeping it so that you can break out sooner? From here, it was clear that despite her best efforts, Akeno wasn't going anywhere with her attacks. Her anger and weariness was clear even from here, as was her frustration as the Bomb Queen's greater battle experience overcame her sheer power. Each bolt of lightning was easily redirected by a perfectly timed explosion. The transparent red fox snorted scornfully as it hovered in the air, its crimson, slitted eyes focused on the raven-haired princess above them. It's only a matter of time for someone like me. Those are big words coming from a fur ball that wastes all his energy just to insult me. At this rate, we're not going to go anywhere before I turn into a doddering old man. Naruto shot back easily. It would certainly be an improvement over your current state. What the hell does that mean? No matter how hard you try, you will never extinguish our fire. Even if I fall today, the will of fire I have lit in my friends, my comrades, will continue to burn. The fox folded his arms with a smirk. The blonde closed his eyes silently and softly finished the rest of the sentence. You can try to blow those hard as you can, but if even a single tiny candle light remains, we will continue to burn. No matter what stands in our way, we will burn it down because that is our right to live by our own choices no matter how painful, how stupid and how bitter they are. You will not bring us down. If you want to drown us in dreams, then come. We will burn you as well. That Naruto was an idiot, but at least he had the right idea. He doesn't have the skills you do, but he had the spirit. He didn't have the brains, but he had my respect. You? You're a pitiful shadow of the person that once was. That Naruto died when he watched the person he loved get stabbed in the heart, protecting him from the best friend he kept trying to save. The best friend that turned on him the moment the battle was won. No. The kitsune corrected him softly, he's still there. He died. The Uzumaki bit out. No, he did not. Naruto winced at the firm tone and averted his eyes. Yes. Run away. Go back to that pathetic existence. That small shed where you live with that head of an accursed Uchiha while you scratch out a small existence at a ramen store. You do realize what you're asking me to do, right? Naruto replied flatly, his eyes on the fight unfolding before him. You've never needed a reason before. If someone wasn't supposed to be crying is crying in front of you, you moved. If someone whose back was bent under his burden, you helped him carry it because you could. If someone who only had the power to curse God for being so weak looked at you, you helped. If only because you had the strength he didn't. This is a stupid match. None of them are really in danger. The blonde pointed out. And yet her choice is in danger, the choice you made an oath to protect on the blood of all who died fighting that very same battle. She does not wish to be bound to a man like that. The presence paused a moment to savor the victory he knew he had scored when the blonde did not reply. That was all the reason you needed, and now you're standing here, watching people who actually like an abrasive son of a bitch like you get beaten to death and you do nothing? I thought being a depressing asshole was my job? Kurama sighed and laid one clawed paw on the boy's shoulders, the boy who I acknowledged, not as my master, not as my container, and not even as my jailer. But as my friend is still there. He's hurt and he's crying, but he's there. Rather than lash out in anger, in hate and in vengeance like the Uchiha, he chose to seal himself away until such a time when he can face the sun again and smile once more. Kurama sighed as the blonde continued to stare at the sky silently. Is it that heavy? That little, dirty thing that dropped by your feet? So heavy that you can't even hold on to it that little while more? He asked quietly. Yeah, it is. For someone like me who doesn't have a place to call home anymore, a simple wandering mercenary whose hands are soaked with the blood of the best friend he couldn't save because he was too weak, with the blood of the person he loved that he couldn't save because he was too naive, it's too bright, too shiny, and too heavy to keep holding. Kurama closed his eyes as his last bit of hope faded. He had said what he wanted to say, but it seemed like it was already too late. Then the blonde hopped down from the branch. But I just can't bring myself to let it go. Kurama blinked. Then he grinned, displaying each and every one of his fearsome fangs. You think you can handle this without me? PFFT. The blonde flipped him the middle finger without bothering to look back. For something like this, I won't even need you to lift a pinky. So just go back and rest in your cage, you stupid, sappy fur ball. Then when you're back, we can go wild again. You only have as much chakra as Kakashi right now, you know? 3S ranks and you're done for the next half a year. Not even I can help you then. Who the hell do you think I am, you naggy fox? The Uzumaki merely gave a languid wave in response. I'm the man who can make the impossible, possible, you know. Kurama snorted one last time, then he smiled softly at the blonde's back. Whether it was a trick of light or not he did not know, but what he did know was that he could see the backs of every single ninja, every single person who had fought beside him, who had entrusted their strengths to him, who had placed their faith in him. All of them were proudly standing tall by the man named Naruto Uzumaki. He was still hurt inside and he was still running away, but that was all right. Everyone had the right to run away, to find a place to heal, even monsters like him. It was all right because he wasn't standing still in the dark anymore. End game play. Guilty crown. Krona Akeno hit the ground with a heavy grunt. What was left of her smoldering left wing had been damaged too heavily to keep her aloft anymore. And that wasn't even counting the fact that she could no longer feel anything in her left arm, thanks to the gaping wound in her shoulder. She grit her teeth as she tried to prop herself up, gingerly trying to avoid moving her wing too much. The pain was excruciating, to the point where tears glistened in her eyes, but she couldn't even withdraw them with how badly hurt they were. A slight rustle of wings alerted her as her opponent daintily landed, and she instinctively rolled away as the ground beneath her exploded forcefully. She was saved from the flames, but she still felt shards of sharp rocks piercing her body as the force of the explosion sent her flying again. Suppressing a cry of pain as she hit a tree with a crack, Akeno glared at the bomb queen through dark watery eyes, bristling at the condescending smile plastered to her expression. To the side, a woman in lightly armored leather clothes watched. What little she could see of the rook's expressionless face matched the white porcelain half-mask perfectly. The bomb queen snorted elegantly. So this is as far as the lightning queen can come, is it? The wavy-haired woman laughed loudly. Such arrogance, to call yourself the lightning queen even though you haven't even proved yourself in a single rating match. Akeno bit down on her lips, refusing to fall for the bomb queen's taunts or release the painful groan bubbling up inside her despite her now broken wings. Consider this punishment for that huge head of yours. A flame lit up in her delicately manicured hands. Die with the knowledge that you'll be serving beneath me when you wake up. Ku. Akeno closed her eyes. For all her strength to only amount to that much. It was frustrating. It was humiliating. It was. Raiten, Reikiri. A blur of yellow and bright blue blitzed out of the trees. It was Naruto. The blur moved so fast that she could barely keep up as it flashed across the clearing with speeds that she doubted even Kiba could achieve at his best, and slashed once. What the fuck? That wasn't any lightning-type spell she knew, and she knew plenty. Blood splattered the ground as the bomb queen stumbled back with a screech and a deep slash on her right thigh. Oh? A blonde emerged with an indolent smirk from the bush where the yellow and blue blur had disappeared into. That's not bad. That was my teacher's own special creation, you know. To dodge an A-ranked, high-speed assassination skill like that shows you're pretty experienced, you stupid fool. What the hell are you doing here? Get away. The blonde in the sharp black suit sweat dropped at her. Akeno. That was my long-awaited entrance. Why'd you go and spoil it for? You idiot. Lightning doesn't work on someone like her. Her explosions superheat and disperse the air particles before electricity can reach Yerk. Akeno was cut off as Naruto hit the top of her head with a hard fist. Just rest and let me handle the rest. Akeno blinked. This was a different kind of Naruto she was used to. The Naruto she knew would have brushed it off uncaringly, or teased her or insulted her. This one sounded like he was utterly calm. His voice was filled with a simple confidence. Another lightning user, huh? You'll lose the same way as she did then. The bomb queen interjected angrily as the rook helped her stand up. You only scratched me because it was a sneak attack. I think you're misunderstanding something. The blonde smirked as he blurred slightly around the edges. Just because you can deflect it with your flames does not mean it's quite so easily tamed. Their eyes went wide as two more blondes, wearing the exact same smirk, the exact same face and the exact same suit, stepped out of his shadow. Let me tell you something about that skill. He crouched low as the third shadow clone darted off to engage the rook and draw her away from the bomb queen. The Reikiri was created to rival a technique that my teacher's teacher created, and just like that technique, the Reikiri is only the first step. A low whine began to fill as a crackling chain of lightning began to form between the two remaining blonde's hands. The next step is a wide-range assassination technique. His eyes glinted maliciously, and it's perfect for people like you that were immobilized by the first technique. You still plan to use lightning-type spells even though you know they are useless against someone like me? Fool. The bomb queen bellowed at him. The crackling link between them reached a super high pitch as it sharpened into a clearly buzzing saw. And what's wrong with being a fool? He responded with another smirk, and Yuba Luna felt herself steam up. He was not using lightning because it was at all he could use. He was using lightning specifically because she had told him not to. Raiden. Both of them immediately shot off with incredible speed. The buzzing chainsaw of lightning spread out between them like a deadly, razor sharp, net. Dread filled Yuba Luna as she glanced at where the rook with the half mask was being kept busy by the agile clone before she looked back at the rapidly approaching blondes. Then her lips twisted into a smug smile. Making sure that her dress covered her hands, Yuba Luna watched the approaching buzzsaw that threatened to shred her head like a grinder would an apple as she prepared her trap. The moment the strange intruder got close enough, she whipped out her hand and an explosion erupted right at his feet. However, instead of stumbling, the dumbfounded devil could only stare with her mouth slightly open as the blonde simply vaulted over the explosion with preternatural grace without disrupting his own spell. That kind of reaction time simply wasn't possible for a normal person, especially at the kind of speeds he had been moving at. Not even high-level devils had that kind of reflexes unless they were specifically trained for it. Gritting her teeth, she released her second trap, a delayed explosion that had been set while he was distracted by her first attack, directly where the chain would have passed. As the loud fireball went off successfully just before they reached her, Yuba Luna smirked as the heat dispersed the buzzsaw, snapping the fragile link, just as she had planned. Her smirk dropped as she noticed the blonde's own grim smile widening. I lied. Just as they soared by her prone body harmlessly, the two ferociously sparking ball in their grasp cracked wildly and a bright blue cage seared into existence and tightened around her, snapping her arms against her body and electrocuting her as it held her in place between the two identical Uzumaki. While the original Raiden was indeed meant to be an area of effect assassination technique, mine is somewhat different. As the bomb queen began to scream as her organs boiled, the blonde's smirk merely widened further. Mine is a trap meant to set you up for the third and final form of the Reikiri. Her blurry, pained eyes met his cold, amused ones as she struggled to say something, but the electricity coursing through her body prevented her from even moving a muscle. Like his teacher's skill, my teacher never managed to finish it in time. From where he was standing, his clone on the other side of the lightning field was obscured by the crackling light and for just a moment. He thought he saw Kakashi standing there instead, with his customary eye smile and a thumbs up. Naruto let a warm smile grace his features as his free hand blitzed through a series of hand signs. Like his teacher's skill, I completed it. He felt a strange warmth flowing from his chest as a sense of approval emanated from the person on the other side. Like his teacher's skill, I surpassed it, he snapped his fingers. Raiden. Akeno stared disbelievingly as a massive column of raw, sheer electrical power that hurtled from the darkened skies and smashed into the ground like a vengeful god's hammer, utterly obliterating anything that had been within its abnormally huge range. Yuba Luna had never felt anything like this before. When she had been hit by the first skill, she had thought it was excruciating. This, on the other hand, went far beyond that. At first, there had been an all-consuming torture as the torrent overcame her defenses and completely fried her from the inside out. It lasted for only a brief moment before her mind had simply shut down all her pain receptors. And then there was nothing. That said, feeling your blood boil and bubble as your skin and organs shriveled and cracked without any sign of the pain she had expected was definitely one of the strangest things she had ever felt. Then the river of power stopped as suddenly as it had started, and Yuba Luna's blackened body fell to her knees in a position of supplication with her arms frozen in a twisted mess above her head because her muscles had been electrocuted to the point where she looked like a caricature of something that had died while praying. Her body, coated in charcoal black cocoon of deep-fried skin, was too hard for her to even fall down completely. She couldn't even sigh in relief as she felt the blessed coolness of the earth beneath her, mostly because her lips had already been burnt off and her tongue was nothing but a shriveled piece of burnt flesh by now. Somewhere deep in her mind, the last remaining part of her rational registered the sound of faint footsteps approaching her. Despite herself, two pieces of blackened stuff that used to be her eyelids cracked open tiredly, looking up into the open sky before two flickering blue flames engulfed in a dark shadow slowly filled her blurry vision. A horizontal split filled with white glinting tombstones opened up somewhere below the two dancing flames. Hi! The last thing she saw was a brick heading for her face. Razor Phoenix's queen has retired. Wiping the soot from his hands as he dropped the brick, the blonde glanced at the rook who was frozen in fear while the second clone simply stood behind her, arms casually folded with a shark-like smirk playing on his lips. Her dilated pupils switched from her blacked pile of skin that used to be her queen to the monster standing there. Then they went back to the corpse before she chanced another glance at the monster in the nice suit. Said monster smiled. It was the kind of smile she imagined a cat would have as it cornered a particularly fat and juicy rat. A lightly crackling blue flame began to form on his fist. The rook with the half-mask swallowed audibly as she heard something else crackling behind her. She briefly looked at her queen again. Then she proceeded to punch herself in the nose. Razor Phoenix's rook has retired. Naruto chuckled lowly and let the barely formed Reikiri disperse as he waved at his clones, letting them know that they would not be needed for now. What was that? The Uzumaki cocked his head and leveled an amused look at the owner of the shrill cry. You show up out of nowhere? Akeno waved her hands wildly with a slightly crazed look in her eyes that never left his. Then you use a multi-tier, high-speed, variable-purpose lightning-type spell the likes of nothing I've ever seen before, culminating in that fucking huge blast that leveled a quarter of a forest, something that I doubt that no one short of a high-class devil could probably replicate, and then you go end it by smacking her in the face with a brick and punching that other girl? Technically she punched herself. The blonde pointed out with an amused smile. She pouted at him, that's not the point and you know it. The blonde laughed as he collapsed in the ground beside her and wrapped one arm around her waist, much to the raven-haired girl's utter shock. Don't look so surprised. The Uzumaki noted dryly as a soft green glow slowly spread its warm embrace across her entire body. You're so badly hurt all over that I simply didn't know where to start healing. So I figured I might as well just do it in one go. Unfortunately, that would require close contact with as much of you as possible. I see. Akeno pursed her lips and glared at him. Is that why you are grabbing my ass? Nope. Her classmate grinned widely. I'm doing it because it's a very nice ass. She flushed lightly and averted her eyes resolutely. The energy that seemed to be overflowing from the blonde caressed her, enveloped her, and seemed to soak into her very bones was more than a little exhilarating. The fact that it was also somewhat arousing did not help her disposition. Ju, just hurry up and get it done. Naruto grinned slyly. Hurry it up? Are you sure you want me to do that? He leaned in closer and she shivered as she felt his breath on her neck. When I said it requires close contact, I wasn't joking. Naturally, for maximum efficiency, it would need us both to be naked. He got even closer with as he deliberately locked gazes with her, that blasted smirk still playing on his lips, and joined in a way that I do not think you are ready for. When I can move again, the first thing I do before I go after Razor and save Rias, is rip the skin off your face before I remove your tongue with a blunt spoon. Akeno promised blandly. No need for that. Naruto replied wryly, I'm already dealing with it. She leveled a penetrating look at him. You can split yourself into several people, you can heal people just by touching them regardless of what injury they sustained, your control and finesse over lightning surpasses anything I can do despite my years of training, and you can apparently resurrect people from the dead. The Himejima said with excruciating slowness, as if she wanted to make sure that he did not miss a single word. I can also fart twinkle twinkle little star. What's your point? Who or what the hell are you? Me? The blonde only smiled somewhat sadly. For now, I guess you can just think of me as another mercenary. Endgame what? The hell? The shadow that had spoken quickly thumbed through the pages of a book before him with a frown. There was nothing written in his profile, one of a set of documents submitted by Rias Gremory to the Rating Game Council to register her team. Nothing other than his name and age, as well as a very short list of spells and a small notation that said he did not possess a sacred gear was printed on the flimsy sheet of paper. Naruto Uzumaki? There's nothing in here that says he was capable of using an S-class spell like that. No. Not S-class. A familiar crimson-haired man dressed in a business suit smiled faintly as he corrected his peer. That kind of sheer power and flexibility makes it an SS-class spell at the very least. If he can perfect it, I'd even go as far as to say it would be an X-class spell that could easily stand up to my end annihilation. As it is now, it depends too much on the Raiden to immobilize his opponent, and takes far too long to charge against a more powerful fighter. His colleagues in the darkened room all turned to look at him with narrowed eyes. I find it hard to believe that he was reborn a mere 3 months ago, much less that he's just a simple low-class devil. The first person who had spoken finally said reluctantly. Lucifer's smile widened cheerfully. You do not seem surprised, son. An older gentleman with the same brilliant red hair as him noted, should we assume that he is one of yours? Oh no. I was every bit as pleasantly surprised as all of you, so I can't take credit for this. The superclass devil happily disagreed his father before the Phoenix could protest. I simply saw that he had potential and scouted him to our school via a scholarship. Rias was the one that recruited him in the end. He spread his hands with a gleeful grin. Lucky girl. I can agree with that. All of them immediately turned around and felt shock reverberate through their cores as they stared at the man standing in the doorway. Said man glanced at the wide screen that covered an entire wall with some amusement. So the boy finally moved, did he? I was wondering when it would happen. Then he seemed to notice their dumbfounded looks. What? Forgive our surprise. It's not often that one sees you here. There has not been a challenger for your house in 2 centuries after all. The head of House Phoenix noted quietly even as they bowed slightly in respect. The man calmly walked in and took a seat beside Lord Gremory as he placed the tips of his fingers together thoughtfully. And I am just as surprised to see you here, Lord Phoenix. I was under the assumption that the government was having some problems with the recent spate of murders and assassinations. Please don't remind me, old friend. The tall man rubbed his temples with a heavy sigh. We originally thought it was just a simple power grab among the local Yakuza given the amount of casualties from every faction, but something was missing. Not only was there none of the typical chaos on the streets that we usually see during the usual power grabs, all of them have also basically begun to hole up in their fortified fortresses and flat out refuse to come out unless it's an emergency. One of them even had a friggin' dragon patrolling his castle. Still, given the nature of this match, I had to at least come and see the outcome. I wasn't aware that you had an interest in something trivial like this though. I'm not. The newcomer simply smiled thinly. I simply received a message from an old friend regarding this match. Even I had originally dismissed this match as just a practice one, so imagine my surprise when old Stefan sent me a curious little note asking me to watch out for that boy. Stefan? The suave-looking man with stubble along his jawline that was as vibrantly red as his full crown of long hair despite his age, frowned, the head of House Citri? That is certainly curious. He rarely takes an interest in things like this. I thought so as well. The dark-haired man agreed with a grin. In fact, when the boy started talking to himself in that forest, I was beginning to think that Stefan had finally sniffed one too many of his own medicines. He nodded at the screen with a sweat drop. Of course, right as I was about to leave, the blonde had to go and pull that insanely huge thunderbolt out of his ass. Lord Phoenix quirked one eyebrow before grinning. The crafty bastard made a bet with you, didn't he? What did you lose? The newcomer buried his face in his palms and began crying. One of my oldest bottles of ancient Mesopotamian wine. There was a round of chuckles as everyone in the room laughed at his comical sobs. End game play. John Dreamer, Rias. He watched as Rias had to face Razor with eyes in Asia, who basically had no offensive capabilities by her side, pausing only to nod as he acknowledged a message from his clone about Akeno's safety before his gaze returned to the first-year student from Kuo Academy who was currently smoking and smoldering from Razor's overwhelming control over his flames. It was only by virtue of his stronger defense that he had managed to ride out the Phoenix King's explosion, but even with the boosted gear taking the brunt of the fire, the heat still seared his flesh, and expanding the gauntlet's full strength several times in a row had taken its toll on him. Even without looking, Naruto knew that the boy was already on his last legs. Even if he had the will to keep fighting, the way his muscles twitched uncontrollably told the blonde that Aiza's body would shut down soon, whether or not he wanted it to, much less continue fighting. His predictions were proven accurate less than a second later as Aiza hit the ground. His body battered and blood leaking from his nose as his body failed. Their eyes met, and Naruto saw an accusing look in them, as well as a pleading one. Just take Buku and run. He tried to take a step forward, but for some reason his legs would not move. Gritting his teeth, Naruto closed his eyes angrily. Give up, Rias, Razor said pompously, you have no more pieces left. Any more will be a waste of our time. Move, Naruto. Keep walking. The red-haired girl who was on her knees, cradling Issei's injured body even though she had her own heavy injuries from the Phoenix's flames, looked up. It doesn't matter if you do not know where you are going. Her eyes were filled with a defiant fury, but she knew the truth in his words. It does not matter if the fear is so heavy it bends your back. I'll never stop fighting you, Razor. I utterly reject you. Her hands began to glow as she focused every shred of power she had left in her exhausted frame. You helped me stand up once. You showed me that no matter how ugly and twisted people were, there is hope, a small light inside of them, and you helped me see that light. The light that my father saw in your people. So be it, then. The flashy blonde sighed dramatically as living flames filled his palms. I was hoping to spare you the pain since I would have won either way, but I suppose there's no helping it. As your husband, it's my duty to discipline you. Now it's my turn to help you. He took his first step. His eyes opened and a light burned in them. I will crush your resistance, Rias, just like I will crush your spirit. An impressively huge gout of flame seared out, compressed to a point where it was almost solid, and collided with an equally massive black orb. The two attacks clashed, but the difference in skill and power was noticeable as the pulsing black of ruin was pushed back, giving ground bit by bit as it tried and failed to swallow the sheer amount of flames. Rias was about to give up when she saw her best skill being pushed back despite throwing everything into it. Her heart fell and it almost felt like she was drowning in despair. Until she saw two strange scrolls flying out of the forest. They unfurled and she could briefly see two large symbols painted on their surface before the paper made contact with the jet of solid flame and the orb of destruction. There was a loud sucking sound, before nothing except two smoking scrolls that had somehow rolled back into a neat cylinder. Flames and destruction alike had disappeared, leaving a stunning silence between the two utterly confused devils. Oi, oi. A familiar, lazy voice cut through the tense atmosphere. I feel kinda sad that I'm being left out of something as fun as this. After all, I'm technically one of her pieces too. Everyone turned to the owner of the new voice, who had been keeping out of the fight for reasons known only to him. That is certainly something I will have to fix, won't I? Razor contemptuously raised one hand and was about to send a flaming spear at the nearest piece to him, Asia. Then the blonde was there with narrowed eyes as his black blazer flared like a cape in the wind. In almost slow motion, a scroll slipped into his hands as the fireball approached him and he spread it open like a shield, allowing the flames to smash into the paper with absolutely nothing to show for it before the bright orange inferno simply vanished. The Uzumaki expertly re-rolled the smoking scroll back into a neat cylinder. That's not very polite, you know. Attacking some innocent girl usually isn't the best way to pick one up after all. He pointed out conversationally. Paper? How the hell did you do that with paper? Are you an idiot? You really think I'm going to tell you my tricks? The third-year student drawled as he lazily slipped the scroll back into his sleeve. Razor's eyes widened as his brain registered that the other blonde had just called him an idiot. Idiot? You dare to call me an idiot? Not even my father calls me an idiot. Gah! He threw up his palms again and a raging fire appeared in his hands. Naruto gave him a friendly smile. You might want to look down before you do that. As if I'm going to fall for a lame trick like the scroll between his feet that hadn't been there before suddenly opened and violently expelled the orb of destruction it had sealed earlier, releasing it directly into his family jewels. The flames spluttered out uselessly as Razor went cross-eyed. Endgame ouch. Lucifer pursed his lips as he constrained his laughter with some effort. Ah. Don't mind that, Lord Phoenix. It'll heal. Usually. I'll be very impressed if he can regrow testicles. His father's impressively blank face held on further for an admirable 2 more seconds. Then it shattered and he began to guffaw. That boy. I think I like him. He choked out between chuckles. Graphia rolled her eyes and coughed politely before nudging the older man. You do realize that that's Lord Phoenix sitting over there, right? The father of the boy who just had his testicles eaten off by an orb of destruction? Said father winced. I'm more interested in those scrolls of his. The fourth man in the room commented lightly, sparing a sympathetic glance at Lord Phoenix who grasped at it gratefully. Those are rune symbols. They look almost Sanskrit, but older somehow. He waved languidly. His earlier spells are the same, those weren't demonic spells. In fact, they seemed a lot more like the kind the magicians in Europe use, only without incantations, though I suppose those strange hand signs he did had something to do with it. Sirzechs blinked, then he refocused on the screen as the tall man continued talking. Due to the flames and the speed at which the blonde moved, he had not been able to see anything other than some really tiny writing, and yet the man had managed to identify the language. Though he guessed he shouldn't be surprised. There was a reason he was the reigning emperor of raiding games after all. Endgame, you alright? Naruto asked briskly as he kept an eye out for the phoenix who he had just booted through the horizon, but not before stuffing one of the scrolls containing his own fire down his open mouth. Briefly he wondered if the fire would harm him if it came from inside, even if it was his own flames. Shrugging, he decided that he didn't particularly care. It would be nice if it did, but ultimately it didn't really factor into his calculations. The small blonde girl who had not so much as budged an inch simply peered up at him with complete confidence. Yes, she stated almost to herself, I was praying. So I knew you would come. Naruto? Rias observed quietly. Yes? Please stop trying to strangle yourself. It doesn't work that way. Okay. The blonde man sobbed quietly. Did I do something wrong, Great Saint San? Asia asked with quivering lips, her big wide watery eyes looking up at him. Scratching his cheek, Naruto blew out a resigned sigh. That's not really fair, you know? Eh? Her head tilted to one side as she furrowed her brows cutely. I don't understand, Great Saint San, what isn't fair? Never mind. Forget it. Beside Asia, Rias smiled faintly at their interaction even as she propped herself up on a piece of rubble. She had already sent eyes off the field so he could be healed. Sighing, she beckoned the blonde closer and placed one regretful palm on his chest. What are you doing? The blonde questioned as the palm on his chest began to glow. You asked me earlier what piece I used to resurrect you. Her voice hitched a little, though he was not sure if it was because of her blackened and paralyzed left side, or because of what she was saying. I didn't want to tell you, especially not like this. But at this point, I guess it won't matter seeing as how we're about to lose. Really? There was either something in the water, or devils had a fantastically selective memory. Her eyes cleared with resolve again and continued speaking, prompting the Uzumaki to look for the closest hard surface so that he could bang his head on it. Rias sighed gustily. For some reason, your body refused to accept any of my pieces. Every piece we tried, your body rejected it, and yet you were on the ground bleeding to death. I could not allow that to happen. I would never allow that to happen. Her crimson eyes, glazed over with pain, peered up into his without hesitation or regret. So I bound my life to yours. Naruto froze mid-head bang. You could almost say we were married, if only for a brief few months, Rias said sadly, hazily, as her palm grew brighter. Almost curiously, Naruto felt something inside him being moved, being pulled out, being ripped out. Our pact brought us closer even as my heart yearned for you, for the other half inside you. But as much as I wished it to be, it doesn't automatically cause you to fall in love with me. It could be retracted at any time, as long as you rejected me openly. I would be heartbroken, literally, but you would be free, although it will not change the fact that you are now a devil. She shook her head slowly, crimson red locks bounced in the firelight. That was my only regret. Not because I thought you were weak, but because you didn't get that choice. Even Eyes had a choice, a bad one, but still a choice nonetheless. She pursed her lips with a fierce expression. I do not want to know what would happen to you if I married Razor while you have peace of me and you, and I do not intend on finding out. She gave him an almost loving smile. So I guess this is goodbye, Naruto. She would have continued speaking, but a firm grip wrapped around her smaller hand and slowly removed it from his chest. Fatalism does not suit you, Rias. The blonde observed somewhat glibly. She laughed somewhat dejectedly. You can call it being a fatalist, but I call it being a realist. I've already lost. Now I'm just making sure no one gets caught in the sinking ship, so to speak. I'm not sure if Ni-sama will take an Akeno and the rest. But it'll be better than being with me. Dirt might have flaked her clothes and hair, burns may have seared her skin and pride, but the defiant snarl she sent up to him made her even more attractive than he cared to admit. I don't care if he controls me or touches my body, but I'll be damned if I let him harm my friends. The blonde started laughing. He couldn't help it. Rias simply goggled at the almost giggling blonde with a mildly hurt expression. I finally lost a bet. The blonde remarked to himself through tears, not even he knew if they were tears of laughter or anger. Tsunade Ba-chan's going to drink herself stupid if she finds out her luck finally corrupted mine. She saw it before he did, an orb of white, roiling flames, primed to explode when it collided with the back of the blonde's head, instantaneously killing him. And it had been moving far too fast for her to warn him, but defying all expectations, the blonde moved like lightning. One hand shot out, caught the roiling ball of flames in mid-air. Play AC/DC, back in black, then he crushed it. Rias instinctively shut her eyes as the projectile exploded with incredible force and a torrent of violent flames poured. At that distance, she knew that there was no hope of avoiding it whatsoever, so she already fully prepared to feel the pain of her skin and flesh being seared off her bones. But strangely enough, there was nothing but a soothing caress from the cool air around her. Ruby red eyes opened wearily just in time to see another jet of focused flames attempt to collide directly with the blonde's still intact head. And do absolutely nothing as a barrier flickered into life around them, originating from a spell tag floating in mid-air with the word shield clearly written on it with blood. Numbly, she stared at the invisible barrier protecting her in Asia without even flinching as the blonde slowly stood up. Just rest for now. I'll deal with this. She caught sight of his left hand, the one that had caught the first attack. She didn't need to know his hand was badly hurt. The skin had been roasted off his hand and the flesh smoldered blackly while his fingers were obviously broken. Stop. Please, she whispered, you don't need to hurt yourself anymore. It's fine. Really? So you don't mind if I let you get raped and violated? The blonde questioned with a smirk. Of course I mind. She protested indignantly. Good. Naruto retorted as he bopped her head with his good hand. Now just sit there like an obedient little damsel in distress and be quiet. She glared at him as she rubbed the sore lump on her head. Oh, how? How are you going to do that with your hand hurt so badly? Why, I'm going to go and talk to him like the kind, merciful adult I am, and then persuade him that this marriage is not to his benefit with the aid of logic and reason. Rias spared a doubtful look at Razor, who seemed like he was fuming mad. Scratch that, he was already long past fuming and well on his way to frothing at the mouth blind fury. The reason for that was obvious. The Phoenix had a towering pride, an absolute self-confidence in himself, and an ego that could crush boulders from a mile away, so it was no surprise that he could not bear to be ignored, to be treated like a complete nonentity, which was probably what they had been doing now that she thought about it. A flush crept up on her cheeks as she realized exactly what kind of intimate conversation she had been having in the middle of a battlefield. She blamed it on the pain. I don't think that's going to work. Obviously. She ignored the sarcasm dripping off his dry tone as Blonde's hand literally began to regenerate skin and flesh right before her very wide eyes. I'm not going to waste my time talking to him. What I am going to do, however, is start by shoving this hand all the way up his ass and then rip out something important, the blonde replied with snidely, and then, if that doesn't work, I think I'm going to use violence. A lot of violence. He paused before adding thoughtfully, and if that still doesn't work, I'm going to fuck with his mind until he thinks he's a 5-year-old girl with a daddy complex. Giving her one last offhanded wave, the blonde simply strolled out of the barrier, leaving her lying beside Asia, who couldn't seem to decide if she wanted to laugh at what he had said, or scold him for using naughty words. The laughter was clearly winning if her little giggles were any indication. The sight of the blonde's unflinching back getting more and more distant, as he began to walk towards a fuming Razor, filled her with hope. He easily passed through the barrier and then practically shrugged off the blazing inferno like it was nothing more than a mild annoyance. Razor watched with widened eyes as the blonde began to stomp through the flames towards him, a strange glint in his eyes. "You've come, have you? You weak piece of shit. You are nothing but common scum without a sacred gear worth speaking of, and you dare to ignore me?" Yeah. It was definitely something in the water that made all these devils instantly forget about something they had just seen if it did not fit in their worldview. No matter. He was going to fix that little problem right now. Weak? The blonde abruptly stopped before Razor with a mildly offended expression. "You seem to be woefully unaware of exactly what that means. Let me correct that for you." "Kirk." Razor slowly looked down at the two hands that were buried somewhere below his gut. With a sinking feeling, he realized he could actually feel the blonde's fingers grasping and digging around in his body, before wrapping itself around something. What are you doing?" "Correcting you, of course." The blonde replied with a pleasant smile. "You see, you have made multiple assumptions, based on logic founded on your thus far undefeated streak. You believe that I am weak, ineffective, and defeated because I am not a noble like you, because you have defeated the person I call my king, because I have not retaliated so far, and because I do not have a sacred gear like others." There was a brief pause as the blonde let his words soak into Razor's thick skull as he savored the fear suddenly leaking from the phoenix as his grip on that something tightened to the point where it was almost torturous. That was a reasonable but entirely erroneous assumption. He looked Razor in the eye. "Just because I am weak does not mean I cannot do this." Every single person who had been cheering for Razor to kill the upstart pawn instantly went silent at the sheer brutality on display before, as the blonde casually threw away the dripping spine connected to a disembodied head that he had just removed via manual ass shove. The limp body went in the other direction, spraying blood and guts everywhere. Except on his killer for some strange reason. It didn't take long for a newly reborn Razor to stumble out of a pillar of flame, naked as the day he had been born, with an utterly surprised expression that lasted barely a second before he surged forwards with a yell as he summoned two great blades made of nearly solid flames in his hands. His battle cry reached its zenith as he brought down both blades on the Uzumaki, who was simply watching him with a smirk. Undaunted at all by his incoming death, Naruto slipped two kunai into his hands and darted forwards. Flame and steel clashed and sparked, as the two of them accelerated until their blades were nothing more than a flash of light bouncing of steel or fiery trails left behind by the solid flames when the Uzumaki leant over backwards to avoid a horizontal slash. Then, instead of snapping back up, the blonde continued to lean backwards before one foot and crashed into Razor's chin, sending him flying. Crashing lightly, Razor cursed as he spat out a tooth. "Curious about my blades?" Razor froze halfway standing up as the third-year student at Kuo Academy simply smirked at his reaction. If he didn't know any better, he'd say that the Phoenix was afraid that he could read his mind. He spun his small knives around by the ring holder casually. "After a certain encounter with a thoroughly unpleasant person, I had my knives coated with a special heat-resistant solution. That said, they are still only metal, so they can only last for that long." The blonde admitted somewhat sadly as he rubbed the badly nicked edge of the kunai. "They're my last ones too." Then he threw both kunai at Razor with a flick of the wrist, who immediately leapt away. Cage Buyo, 8 trigram strike. The original Leaf Shadow dance had been a simple C-rank supplementary technique that was meant to maneuver an opponent into a more vulnerable position by supplementing the user's speed with a burst of chakra before a high-speed uppercut or kick from below. The Leaf Shadow dance by itself was generally somewhat harmless, and its strength lay in its ability to open an opponent's guard for the user to follow up with other more damaging techniques. His Cage Buyo also started with a burst of speed with the aim of slipping through someone's defense, but that was where the similarities ended. The blur reached Razor the second before he landed, the 1 second he was unguarded, and darted past the clumsy, panic swing of his two broadswords before landing his left elbow on Razor's chin, knocking out his higher-level thought processes as his brain was rattled around his skull before he spun in the other direction and locked his foot behind Razor's knee while his left arm gripped Razor's left wrist, and landed several rapid elbow strikes on the devil's torso. Then, without even bothering to look back, he simply left the Phoenix standing there like a statue. Despite its status as a relatively weak C-rank technique, Naruto had always wondered why the Cage Buyo was one of the harder taijutsu skills to perform. Even the original Cage Buyo's standard opening, an upward kick from inside the opponents, was nothing more than a load of wasted time. Not to mention the long hang time gave anybody that had a decent lick of skill a chance to fight back, seizing the chance to counterattack just as the user initiated the more powerful, and therefore, inevitably slower follow-up. That said, the concept itself was sound, and Naruto, being the nut job he was, had twisted it and improved it to the point where Guy would probably wet himself with joy if he ever saw the new Cage Buyo and beg for a chance to learn it. Therefore, like the original, his version was focused on slipping through their defenses and landing a debilitating blow with Tsunade Ba-chan's signature enhanced strength, already a near-lethal knockout on its own. Unlike the original, his technique utilized the knowledge of the human body, passed down to him from his grandmother, to lock down their movement and eliminate any chance of a counterattack or an escape before hitting their tenketsu at point-blank distance. He did not have the eyes to see where there were, nor did he know how to insert chakra into them like the gentle fist, but it probably didn't matter given how each individual strike had enough power to blow entire holes in granite. Simply put, his Cage Buyo was a condensation of everything Tsunade had painstakingly carved into his body, packaged nicely with a deceptively harmless C-rank technique, and then delivered with a nice fistful of fuck you. As he stood up slowly, he somehow smelt alcohol faintly wafting in the air as a hand gently squeezed his shoulder. He smiled thinly and closed his eyes for a brief moment. Behind him, Razor dropped to his knees and his eyes rolled up into his head as his sword slid out of his slack grip. He was already dead. End game in the darkened room for the VIPs. Daihyuzer Belial's brow rose as his smile widened as the blonde casually walked back to the painting in the ground and continued what he had been doing earlier. What the hell? Lord Phoenix repeated for the second time that night. It would not be the last time. How many strikes did you see him land, Lord Phoenix? Daihyuzer asked curiously. The straight-backed man with graying hair shook his head. It couldn't have been more than 28. And you, Sirzechs? 78. The red-haired man replied easily, his eyes never leaving the screen. Lord Phoenix blinked. Daihyuzer nodded slowly. I counted 98 strikes. To every vital point in the young Phoenix's body. In less than 1 minute. The man with the graying hair stared at him incredulously, and judging by what I can feel from here, I'm pretty sure he has magic swirling around the tips of his elbow as well, although I'm not sure what it's for. What I am sure of, is that even I would be hard-pressed to remain standing if I took something like that head-on. Sirzechs pinched the bridge of his nose. Endgame this time, when the Tower of Flame appeared again, Razor didn't even wait to fall out and Naruto's eyes bugged as the tower itself bent over and then roared towards him like a thundering cyclone. Then an equally huge wall of water surged and crashed into the cyclone, easily holding up against it, and then swallowing it and the person hiding within. Suten, Suijin Heki. A loud scream came out from within as the resultant steam roasted his skin before every bone in his body was pounded by the blunt force of the waves. Just as the water receded and Razor's limp body succumbed to gravity again, a massive pillar of stone hurtled out of the ground and smashed into him, sending him rocketing back into the sky. Doten, Tusky Kobushi. 2 other identical pillars crushed him from the sides, holding him in the mid-air. Raiten, Ikazuchi no Kiba. Every single nerve of his boy lit up like a Christmas tree and the blonde screamed until his throat tore as 2 equally bright bolts of crackling lightning spread through the pillars of earth and then meeting right in the middle where he was hanging. Just as the electricity faded, Razor paled and began to struggle to lose himself when he heard the Uzumaki call out again, although the blonde himself was nowhere to be seen. Uten, Tatsumaki. A slight wind began to pick up in Razor's side in relief as nothing worse than a few pebbles smacked his nose. Then out of nowhere, a full-blown cyclone of wind erupted from the ground and engulfed him. His skin tore and his flesh jerked uselessly as the shards of rock cut him deeply while stray arcs of electricity, drawn to him by his wet body, struck him relentlessly. Katen, Hiro no Orami. The roaring cyclone was instantly engulfed by screeching flames. As the wind tunnel spun faster and faster, as if fanning the flames, and the entire tornado turned a blinding white, incinerating anything that was left behind with sheer intense heat and pressure. Well outside the range of the tornado's intense vacuum, a certain Uzumaki folded his legs casually and grinned. When he had been younger, he had been forced to cram anything and everything could help him survive and within the span of 3 years without actually understanding most of it. Here, the opposite had been true instead, and the bored blonde had had nothing but the time to tinker with the skills he had gained with no one to teach him anything new, save Madara, who was a grumpy teacher even at the best of times. Naturally, this being Naruto, he had decided to satisfy his age-old childish desire of making something big, something violent, and more importantly, something that exploded oh so very awesomely. Suffice to say, he succeeded in doing exactly that. Madara cried a lot that day. Though Naruto wasn't entirely sure whether it was because the disembodied appreciated the sheer destruction his new jutsu could do, or because the aforementioned head had been volunteered as guinea pig for the day. And then, just because he was bored, he decided to see how stupidly big he could make it. It took him 3 weeks to get his hearing back, and another 2 to walk straight again. Uzumaki Jutsu, Gagyo no Mai. The blonde who was still sitting nice and cozy on a rather plain but comfortable stone seat lifted up one hand. Then he snapped his fingers. The incredible cyclone of sheer destruction that had been dominating the entire field like a force of nature and deafening everybody with its roar proceeded to swell and then explode so violently that the thick, magically reinforced shield that protected the audience literally cracked like an egg from the sheer force of the detonation, while pieces of Razor's burnt and torn body was scattered all over the field along with a rain of deadly flames and rocks. Let it be said that a bored Naruto Uzumaki with nothing to do but mope was a very dangerous Naruto Uzumaki. Something that a currently dumbfounded Rias could easily attest to. In the forest behind them, Akeno pinched the bridge of her nose. She had obviously known by now that he was definitely capable of using lightning and fire, and used them well, but he certainly hadn't said a damn thing about being able to use all 5. And to combine every single opposing element to create something of this level. To think that there had been one hell of a monster in her class, and she hadn't even felt a single thing from him. For 3 whole years no less. End game. In that darkened room, someone was currently agreeing with Akeno's sentiments. What the hell is that? Sirzechs pursed his lips as he stared at the large cyclone of fire dominating the screen. It was at least 3 times larger and more violent than anything Razor had been able to muster. It's over then. He softly observed thoughtfully. His father shrugged casually. It was over the moment the Phoenix boy let the Uzumaki finish using his spells. He didn't even need to finish it actually, but I suppose he's just showing off at this point. Actually, it was already over the moment Razor let that boy cut him when the match began. The head of House Belial corrected his peer mentally, but he kept it quiet, wanting to see how the boy proceeded first. Lord Gremory furrowed his brow thoughtfully. Still, I never thought I'd see a Shinto technique like that here. The principles of the 5 elements. Flames are drowned by water. Water is absorbed by earth. Earth is split by lightning. Lightning is cut by wind, and finally, wind is devoured by the flames. Graphia cocked her head. I'm not sure I understand. She admitted, I do not have much experience with Shinto priests. It's an interesting idea that makes use of the interaction between each element's inherent nature, DxD explained with a thin smile. One element feeds the next, increasing its strength and potency far beyond just doubling the original spell's capacity due to their opposing nature. That forms the foundation of the elemental mutual generation. Even if he's been using nothing but lower class spells for it, it is still more than enough to create something like that monster of a tornado we're looking at right now. He slowly lifted his hand to point the screen, but what's really interesting, however, is not the fact that he can use it. It's the fact that he's compensating for his lack of reserves by using that concept to increase the energy in the air around him by tenfold. Razor's father blinked. What would he want to do something wasteful like that for? Instead of answering, DxD moved the point of view of the screen with a flick of his wrist so that they were watching the fight from high above, giving them a bird's eye view of the entire field. As one, their mouths dropped. I'd imagine it's to power that ridiculously huge seal that he managed to paint on the ground with your son's blood while distracting everybody with flashy techniques. DxD noted with a smirk, everything he's been doing the entire time has been leading up to this. Up till now, there was always a chance that Razor could still win, but when he completed it. The tall and composed man spread his hands with a wry smile. The head of House Gremory began to chuckle softly. I'm starting to really like that boy now. Endgame. When Razor opened his eyes again, the first thing he did was stumble and then fall down on his face. Something was off, Razor thought with gritted teeth. It was not strange for him to die more than a few times in a rating match, and more often than not die violently as his opponents tried to discourage him from continuing the battle. So getting chopped up or burnt or torn into pieces was something he was already used to. He would not have given up from something small like that alone. But this time he had only resurrected himself thrice so far, not a large number by any stretch of the word, and yet he was already weary to the bone. Then he caught sight of the Uzumaki. The bastard had summoned a throne of stone, and he was sitting on it as if he owned the place. Worst of all, was the smirk. That condescending smirk as that scum looked down on him. Rage, pure fiery rage filled him to the brim and he threw up his hands, a bubbling fire attack growing progressively larger. Just as suddenly as the rage came, it left as he fell to his knees and began to puke blood. What? It's starting to work, isn't it? The other blonde murmured as he spared a quick look at his pocket watch again, a little late. But at least now I know it worked. Whoa, work? My apologies. The Uzumaki's smile was razor sharp. I poisoned you earlier this afternoon, but since it was something I only recently created, I haven't had the chance to properly identify all its properties or get the timing down perfectly yet. There was a distinct shortage of willing test subjects, you see. Poison? Razor spat blood out as he shakily got to his knees, even as his stomach constricted painfully. That cannot be. We phoenixes are immune to poison. That would not be entirely correct, the blonde replied conversationally. Your species succumbs to poison like any other. The only difference is that you come back, perfectly healthy, with the poison burned from your systems when you resurrect. He winked at the shaking man insultingly. It was a real pain to find something that would stay in your systems when that happened, I'll tell you that, but find it I did. He tapped his cheek, that same dangerously playful smirk still playing on his lips. The best part about this poison is that it won't kill you. Not at first. It drains you of your energy, it eats away at your vitality until you have nothing left in your reserves. His thin smile widened until it looked like his face had been slashed in half as Razor proceeded to drastically pale at his words. You could even say that it makes you almost human. You lie. Do you want to know something interesting about phoenixes? Naruto continued to talk over Razor's gibbering. They are not actually perfectly immortal. Their ability to resurrect depends on whether or not they have the energy left to initiate a burning. Shut up. You're just trying to distract me. Their bodies come back perfectly. Naruto rode over his shouting with his solid, calm tone, but it doesn't replenish their mental strength, their energy. It can't. So I asked myself, what would happen if I managed to completely drain a phoenix? Stop, I order you to stop talking. He leaned forward as his smile turned distinctly hungry. Razor took a step back as insanity began to irradiate from the man on the throne. What would happen when I put a knife between your shoulders? If I crushed your heart like a toy? Would you still come back? Younger? Older? As an egg? So many interesting questions I'm just dying to answer. The sweating phoenix heaved himself upright with a ragged cough. Seeing the blonde stand there with a serene smile and not a single burn on him, caused something to snap in the young phoenix as he snarled in unthinking rage, and he threw up his palms. It was the same fire he had seen the noble use again and again, but this time it came out like a pouring tidal wave, a white-hot conflagration that devoured all the trees around them. Asphalt resisted for barely a moment before they melted into a black goop. Rock withstood his fury for a second before they were turned into slag. Then it collided with the blonde and the throne he had been sitting on like a physical force, and the roar of the flame seemed to impersonate the noble's defiance, deafening everyone within range. Razor poured everything, his ruined pride, his demented rage and his absolute desperation into his flames, exulting as the insect melted into ash, bones and all. I'm impressed. You still had enough power to do something like that? Play 2 Steps from Hell. Strength of 1,000 men. Razor's eyes went wide as all the blood instantly drained from his face. No. That's not possible. You're just a weak insect. He had given it his best, his ultimate creation, the manifestation of all his fury and rage, the white-hot flames of a wrathful phoenix. Yeah, I admit I'm weak. The fire parted, allowing the blonde to emerge, looking absolutely resplendent in his lean, black suit. Whether in the past, even in the present, and even in the future, I will always be weak. That will never change. He began to move forward, utterly ignoring his flames, completely shrugging off the blinding inferno. I'm a coward. I run and hide when I don't want to face facts, and people have died because of that. People I love. Friends and comrades. All of them died because I was too weak to stand up and say that's enough. One finger pointed at Razor imperiously. But that's the difference between you and I. Not even the blazing heat made him flinch in the slightest while he implacably advanced towards Razor as if the fire was only there to make him look even better. Difference? Razor croaked weakly. Even his blasted suit still looked as sharp and pristine as it had this morning, which should be impossible given how much he had been moving. Yes, Naruto agreed with a pleasant smile, we're both weak cowards. But unlike you, I accept it. Unlike you, I have friends with me. He slammed one fist onto his chest. His eyes were literally glowing with faintly suppressed power. The ground below them began to glow brightly, and Razor felt his skin crawl as the symbols on the ground, symbols he hadn't even noticed were there detached from the ground and began to creep up his body like a centipede. And it fucking hurt. Friends that will give everything to come and wake me up with a slap when I'm being silly. It was like the words had a trillion tiny legs that were made of fire as they crawled up his skin, branding his skin with their heat with excruciating slowness. His limbs, even his body, completely stopped responding. Friends who would willingly give their soul to save some stupid stranger dying on the side of the road. All he could do was watch helplessly as the runes crawled up his torso, up his neck, and then across his eyes. And that was before the tiny writing began to dig through his eyeballs and into his pupil. Do you? Instantly, the pain hit a blinding pitch and his mind had to temporarily shut down to protect himself from the pain. He did not know how long had passed out for. All he knew was that when he regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was a warm, friendly smile. He remembered that smile well, and his first move was to immediately reach up and burn the face into ashes. His palm slapped the face, and the only thing that happened was the smile widening slightly. There was no torrential river of flames, no all-consuming rain of fire. There wasn't even a tiny spark or a cloud of smoke. Razor stared at his hand disbelievingly, as if it was a strange creature he had never seen before. Then a sword sliced the said arm. Ignoring the fact that the sword had vanished into thin air, Razor screamed and held the arm to his chest, gurgling at the pain. Hurriedly he brought it up, and a few tears splashed onto the gaping wound that used to be his hand. Nothing happened. The stump of a hand just kept gushing out precious lifeblood. "Here, let me help you with that." Razor began to howl as the dark shadow above him grabbed the stump and proceeded to dig his fingers into the open wound. The warm and friendly smile turned distinctly malicious. "Wouldn't want you dying so fast after all." Fire sparked into life at the tips of the blonde's finger and flesh began to sizzle painfully as the Uzumaki cauterized the stump with deliberate slowness. Razor screamed and roared, his body jerking uncontrollably on the ground at the pain. What did you do to me? A tiny, pathetic flame like that. Shouldn't even singe me. Is that so?" He removed his fingers from the burnt stump, and then he began to trace the still burning finger along Razor's face, leaving a burning scar on his previously handsome features. How could this be? Not only was fire burning him, but he felt incredibly weak, incredibly drained. No. Not drained. Empty. Like a. How does it feel to be human? Who human? The blonde leaned in closer. Not like a human. The hand clamped down on his face and Razor screamed as he felt 5 spots burning flesh on his face as the blonde slowly lifted him up by the grip on his head. "You are a human in every way that matters now." Razor's terrified eyes watched as the Uzumaki's other palm lit up with an equally small flame. His eyes followed the palm as it came closer and closer until it was pressed dangerously close against his naked torso. "I know your family is watching this." The heat at his abdomen grew a little, as the Uzumaki whispered in his ear. The entire time they had been fighting, he had spoken with nothing more than a slightly amused, but politely even tone. That inflection had not budged an inch no matter what happened. Right now, he sounded disgustingly happy. "Should I show them how I execute their son? Their brother?" All at once he slammed the palm onto his stomach and turned the heat up. Razor screamed again, spasming wildly as he hung in mid-air from the blonde's grip on his face. "Should I show them how a phoenix dies?" The dark voice kept whispering in his ear as dark crystal blue eyes happily peered into his teal ones. "Beg me to let you live. Tell me how pathetic you are." Never," he spat at the blonde. The skin on his torso literally melted away and the blonde plunged his fiery limb into the phoenix's innards. All at once, the pain became unbearable as the fire came back, cooking him slowly, killing him painfully from the inside out. He knew exactly why the Uzumaki was using fire when he could have used any other element. He was doing it on purpose, to taunt him, to show him that he no longer had any control over fire, to show him that he was completely at the Uzumaki's mercy. Good. I thought you forgot how to fight." He could feel the fire in his gut get hotter, he could smell his flesh cooking. "Struggle harder. Show your family how hard a proud phoenix can fight before it dies. Permanently." The acrid smell of urine stung his nose as he lost control over his bladder. Family? All at once, Razor's pupils went impossible wide as the hand still stuck in his gut began to climb up instead, pushing aside his lungs. The monster grinned even harder. "Look over there. Your family. They are trying to save you." Razor spared the side of the field a quick glance, and his breath hitched at the sight of his mother, beating on the barrier. Beside her were all the servants of the House of Phoenix. He was going to be saved. "No, you're not." He could feel the uncomfortably hot hand reaching for his heart. "They can't come in. I made sure of that." Before his very eyes, the servants of House Phoenix slowly turned around, their eyes completely blank as they stabbed his sister and his mother from behind. "No. I wanted you to watch the light leave their eyes as the people you consider trash violate them again and again. Helpless to stop it." Before his very eyes, the servants fell on the corpses of his family and began to rip off their clothes, and even their very flesh. They were still alive, their eyes were open, their mouths open wide with silent agony, silently begging him to help. For anyone to help. Razor sobbed and tried to tear his eyes away from them, but his neck refused to obey his commands. It didn't make a difference anyway. If he died now, the rating game's ability to protect someone that died would not work for him, he knew, because he had been the one to arrogantly demand the change of rules, specifically for him. If he died, He was going to truly die. He wasn't going to come back. There was no safety net for him. The glint in those icy blue orbs told him that the Uzumaki knew that as well, and as if prove it, the flames heated up to an unbearable point. Up. What was that? The fist that had been digging around his chest froze and the fire cooled down a bit. PL, please. Stop. Save them. Please. The phoenix croaked with much difficulty. His throat was bone dry, and his lungs refused to respond properly. Those terrible eyes slowly came back up and he let that killer's smile slowly stretch his lips at the fear reflected the phoenix's eyes. No. Why, Razor roared angrily, you would stand by and watch someone get raped and violated. Didn't you? He froze as the person behind him started to sound distinctly demonic. That's what you think, isn't it? Humans, low-class devils. All those are trash, scum. They don't need stupid things like pride, all they can do is scrabble in the dirt to keep alive. Fit only as bed warmers, as boot lickers for nobles you. His fingers curled around his still beating heart. But then you're not a phoenix anymore. You're human trash now. The burning hand began to squeeze. He couldn't scream at the incomparable pain even if he wanted to, his throat was long gone, torn by his own screams. But I'll give you a choice, Razor. Beg me, again Razor. The amused voice said softly, tell me you want them to live as whores and prostitutes. And I'll let them live in exchange for yours. Beg for yours. And I make sure the last thing they see is your betrayal. M.E. I want to live, Naruto chuckled softly, dangerously. Wrong answer. Naruto crushed the heart in his hand. Goodbye Razor. I look forward to playing with your mother and sister. Endgame. His eyes opened again and Razor shot upwards, breathing heavily. What? Where the hell am I? In hell. Someone stepped out of thin air and Razor growled. Said someone gestured around the black, empty expanse grandly. Do you like it? I made it personally for you. You. Razor tried to attack the blonde but his arm suddenly twisted like someone had put it in a blender, breaking his bones at several points. TSK, TSK, TSK. The blonde waved one finger at him as he clicked his tongue. In here, I am God. You don't get to do anything that I don't allow. His leg bent backwards until his pelvis broke in half. Seals are pretty convenient, you know. The Uzumaki smiled gently and snapped his fingers. A true seal's master can do anything with them, including recreating a bloodline-specific technique. He waved his hand again and Razor found himself back in the arena, on the ground. It can even make you see and feel the same thing over and over again. His mother and sister were alive. And healthy. A familiar burning began in his chest as someone began to carve out his guts. There are a few kinks I have yet to work out properly yet, but on the bright side, I managed to improve it a little as well. That said, it certainly takes a crap load more of chakra to power than the original. No. 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 Then they were stabbed from behind, their eyes were filled with an accusing hate at him, for letting the blonde do this to them. No. Do enjoy yourself in here. You have another 365 years to go. He bowed politely and slowly began to disappear bit by bit, until there was nothing left but a full-blown slasher smile. Please. No, God I beg you, stop. His chilly tone reverberated all around Razor. I do not expect to see you sane ever again. Endgame plays Supercell, perfect day. Naruto blew out a heavy breath and collapsed on an old but worn seat. It was just for a while, he told himself, he just needed a moment to gather himself. Keeping up a confident and perfectly calm exterior had exhausted him on top of everything, but it had been an essential part of his mind games. It does not matter if you know that you have already lost the battle. What matters is that your enemy does not. He turned his tired eyes and looked around him fondly. The seat and the worn desk before him were floating in a black, empty expanse, and he gently traced a finger across the wooden whorls of the desk with an affectionate smile. Despite its apparent age, it was obviously well cared for. Even without looking, he knew that a leaf symbol was emblazoned on the front of the desk. Across from him was an equally old but well cared for red sofa that he knew intimately, having spent more than a few nights sleeping on it when he was young. A true seal's master can do anything with them, huh? The voice chuckled, not bad. Classy, but tastefully understated. I would have gone for something a bit more bombastic though. Naruto was instantly on guard. Whoa, no need to be so jumpy. We haven't talked in a while after all. Blue crystalline eyes pierced the apparition, then they closed to hide the pain glittering in them and he bit down on his lips so hard that they began to bleed. I knew I should have fixed that glitch. He considered it a minor miracle that he managed to keep his voice steady. The apparition shrugged, his long white ponytail made him distinctly like a ruffian. Like you said, this is your world. Everything will happen as you will it. Incidentally, You really gonna leave that dumbass in there for 365 days? He buried his face in his hands and began to rub his eyes. I certainly didn't mean this, and no, I won't, the Uzumaki replied flatly, but he doesn't need to know that. As long as he thinks he's going to stay there for so many years, it will cause his own despair to grow, regardless of whether it was true or not. Good point. A little on the harsh side and pretty sadistic though. You're using his own despair to keep him caged in here. The man admitted as he walked around the floating room. His wouldn't get made clicking sounds despite the fact that there was no floor. Then again, given what I can see from your memories, I probably would have just killed him outright. The Uzumaki shrugged. I don't like killing people if I can help it. That's a lie and you know it. Naruto's lips quirked. It's technically the truth. Laughing softly, he set aside the large scroll on his back and collapsed into a seat that had appeared on the other side of the desk. Technically. The older man echoed as he made sarcastic air quotes with his fingers. The only reason you don't like killing people is because you simply think it's the easy way out. Keeping them alive so that they can suffer for what they've done is so much more entertaining, isn't it? Those much older eyes gazed at him sad. 10 years can change a lot, eh, brat? The blonde merely shrugged at the other man's observation. 10 years is a long time. You're an idiot for going alone, by the way. The figure simply shrugged. This world cannot create what you do not know. So I only know I died, and to who, but I don't know how. It seemed like a pretty good idea at the time, but yeah, it was pretty stupid now that I think about it. That said, my reactions and my attitude are based on your memories of the original, so I'm probably as good as you're going to get. Yeah, I finally get to tell you this to your face, he said resolutely, uncaring of the tears began to slide down his cheeks. Fuck you and all your stupid ideas. The words and emotions he had been keeping inside for more than a decade, he finally released them. The man with kabuki makeup on his face spluttered angrily, Oi, who the hell do you think taught you about seals? It's not my fault you thought they were lousy and a waste of time when you were younger. Laughing softly to himself, Naruto summoned 2 cups and a sake bottle, prompting the man opposite of him to laugh uproariously as his eyes glinted with desire at the bottle. Not bad, you still remember my favorite brand. I never forgot. The older man's weathered face flushed a little. The original was never good at the touchy-feely stuff, and so neither was he. Instead he poured the sake into the 2 cups and gently pushed one to the blonde. I suppose this should be a congratulatory drink. He saluted the Uzumaki with the cup. To whom exactly? Naruto shot back dryly as he lifted his own cup. Me, of course. The shadow did a quick and absurd little jiggle in his seat. Who else do you know was awesome enough to train not 1, but 2 Hokage? The blonde chuckled gently at the backhanded compliment, and then they downed their cups in one go. Smashing down his cup, the older man leaned back contentedly with a fond expression on his face. Of course, the second one might have been a little unreliable sometimes and a goddamn goofy idiot most of the time, but I always knew he was going to be somebody important, and it had nothing to do with the fact that he was kid of my most talented student and his equally talented wife. The old man smiled gently to take the sting out of his words. That he still managed to go and get himself titled as the first goddamn commander of the 5 armies just means everyone else finally wised up as far as I'm concerned. Naruto smiled softly. Then he held up something wrapped in plastic. Want one? What is it? Ice cream. End gameplay. Kana Ueda. Snow Rain. Naruto calmly poured a cup of tea into the extra cup he had set aside and gently nudged the saucer away from him. Then he heard someone chuckling softly. Should I add the ability to sense people before they enter a room to the list of everything I never knew you could do? I don't need an ability like that to know you would have come looking for me. Besides, anyone can sense people around them with some practice, some will just take longer than others. He noted absently, still staring out the window. He gestured at the empty seat beside him. Besides, you never asked. You just assumed I was, and I quote, you are still an untrained soldier, you might be able to defeat him with some training but right now you are not strong enough. His eyes briefly left the window to give her a pointed look. Touché, she sighed resignedly and entered the small waiting room outside the student council room, which was currently being used as a temporary meeting room by the 3 senior devils from respected houses whom were acting judges for the practice rating game. In an official rating game, 3 judges were usually randomly selected from the 34 pillars themselves to officiate, but as this was simply an unofficial one meant to settle an argument, it had been decided that there was no need to trouble them and Graphia had simply requested assistance from her contacts to act as impartial judges. The waiting room itself was a small and plainly decorated space with only a few chairs lining the side, along with tables, meant to give their occupants something to do while they waited for a meeting with the student council president. She was familiar with the room, of course. Sona rarely made allowances, even for childhood friends, but for the day, the House of Citri had given them permission to use it as a temporary meeting place. She dropped into the offered seat, In my defense, it's not often you find some random person off the street that not only happens to be perfectly capable of tearing open a phoenix's face for fun but also apparently enjoys watching me make a fool of myself. You've been itching to say that for a while now, haven't you? The blonde noted with a smirk at her blunt reply. Ever since I saw you pull that I'm going fuck everything in the area tornado out of your ass. Rias replied shortly with a perfectly composed expression as she sipped her own tea. He gave her an exceedingly amused smile, and he teasingly bumped his shoulder against hers. So this is what the heir to the House of Gremory is like when she can't be bothered to be reserved, huh? I think I prefer this one. Rias promptly flushed at the sudden gesture. Something had changed with her friend, in fact, his whole aura seemed to have changed. If she had to describe it, it didn't seem to be as spiky or as abrasive as it used to be. The person he had been before would actively push others away, but the one beside her seemed mellower, more neutral and content to just wait for a reason to react. So what's the verdict then? Jumping slightly in her seat at the sudden change in topic, Rias shrugged off her daydreams. The council hasn't decided yet. I get the impression they want to talk to Razor first. And then the two of us probably. The Uzumaki merely chuckled evilly. Then I hope they're patient, because they're going to be waiting for a very long time. What did you do to him anyway? She asked curiously. After that seal activated, he just fell down flat on his face and didn't move again. I did exactly what I said I would. The blonde replied dryly. I scrambled his brains. The crimson-haired princess frowned thoughtfully. Then why didn't he just start over? Resurrect again and come back with perfect health, so to speak. Because I poisoned him, the Uzumaki responded glibly. I wiped out his reserves and made sure he couldn't regenerate before I properly scrambled his brains. I didn't really think a resurrection could fix something like that, of course, but I included it in my calculations anyway since didn't see any point in taking chances. He placed his teacup down with a cold smile, and by the time they managed to find an antidote for my poison to help him rebuild his reserves, it won't make a difference anymore because he'd have to initiate a burning himself to fix it, which won't be happening anytime soon because he has to break through his own despair and nightmares to do it. Rias blinked. She hadn't even thought of that. She had simply assumed he had poisoned him for fun. Then, you already knew you were going to help? The blonde took another drink from his cup as he mused over it himself. No. He finally answered slowly, I did not. At the time, I was simply helping you as per my contract with the Sidri sisters. But when I decided to take a more active role, I essentially based my subsequent steps around the fact that I knew he was already poisoned. I see. Rias's heart-shaped face took on a mildly disappointed mien at his answer. Either way, the main problem they seem to have now is that you're not actually a part of my peerage, therefore, not eligible to take part in the first place. Given the way that the system only recognizes a loss from Razor as if he explicitly says it, which he didn't because you knocked him out completely, I think they're contemplating a draw. A mere technicality. Her schoolmate observed sardonically. Any reasonable person could have seen that he could no longer fight, regardless of whether or not he explicitly surrendered. I know, she sighed frustratedly, there's something else going on behind those doors. Naturally. She glanced at his sideways profile. The blonde in the suit looked completely unconcerned as he sipped on his tea, and she felt herself smile slightly as she realized something. You're not surprised? No, I am not. You wanted it to work out this way? The Uzumaki shrugged. It's not optimal, but for what I have planned, it's good enough. Do I want to know? Probably not. Naruto let his lips twist. I should probably tell you to not react no matter what I say though. It will help in the long run. I'm not sure how to feel about that. She laughed softly and somewhat sadly. On one hand, I want to pity them. You stuck Razor in an eternal cycle of nightmares and despair just for that. So I'm pretty sure whatever it is you have planned for if things don't go your way probably isn't even remotely pleasant. And on the other, I feel like falling in your arms because you would go so far for me despite what I did to you. He turned his gaze on her and she shivered a little at the power he held over her. Do you want it back? He asked quietly. He held up a hand and she felt something beginning to coalesce in the air above his palm. Her feelings were proven right when a small ball of pure crimson light began to form and hover there, flickering a bit. To make your own decisions without being influenced by those artificial feelings, Rias chuckled awkwardly, her eyes riveted on the crimson orb with black occasionally streaking through it. You know, I'm not even surprised you can do that anymore. The blonde simply eyed her neutrally. Once I felt you moving it out of me, replicating the feat was not difficult. Still, it looks kinda red, huh? You're delaying. He pointed out quietly. Shakily she reached out to touch the floating ball. Warmth surged through her as the little ball flickered brightly as her finger neared, welcoming her presence. Abruptly she pulled back and began to chew on her lips. Naruto nodded and let the small orb return to his skin. I see. I suppose it was too early. It's not that. I'm afraid, she murmured quietly, a part of me hates this. It wants you to take it back, and shove it in so deep that it'll never come out again. Then we can go back to the way we were, only this time you already know how I feel. I don't have to keep looking for you every time I turn around, I don't have to just stand by and watch you flirt with Akeno and get all irritated, I don't have to feel like I don't mind being only a mistress to you as long as I can be near you. And at this point, I don't even know whether that part of me is real or fake anymore. Naruto hummed to himself quietly. That night I challenged you. In return for my services, I told you that nothing less than your heart would suffice as payment. The blonde said after a long contemplative moment, a crooked smile on his lips, and although I didn't know it at the time, you have already lived up to your side of the deal magnificently. You abandoned all thoughts of greed, of selfishness, of fear, to save a lonely, pathetic man, even if it meant your place in your beloved rating games would suffer, even if it meant that the world would think you a fool, and even if it meant you lost everything. He slipped one arm around her shoulders and pulled her a little closer. I do not think that someone as strong as that person would let something trivial like missing half her heart dictate her feelings for someone. She hesitantly leaned against him. When the time comes, you will receive what was once yours. If at that time you are no longer afraid, if at that time you have determined what you truly feel with clear eyes, free of anything that may cloud your mind, and still wish to make a contract with me, then at that time, I will accept your decision. Rias laughed softly into the lapels of his suit. Most people wouldn't care, you know. Most people would jump at the chance to be with a beautiful woman. Some even consider it like a predestined bond, like it's their right to receive that love. Instead you want to dismiss this bond, and then ask me to decide without it. Why? The blonde shuffled a bit so that he was more comfortable now that Rias was leaning on him. It's the way I suppose. He answered contemplatively. This hadn't actually happened to him before, or to anybody he knew. Or at least he didn't recall if he had. So he wasn't entirely sure how to answer other than to be completely honest. I do not need some predestined mystical bond to fall in love, I do not need to share souls, nor do I need a marriage contract in order to fall in love. No, it would be more accurate to say that I do not want it to be that way. Rias only smiled as his pensive, measured cadence reached her ears. It was rather comforting. If I were to fall in love, I would want it to be with a woman that can see every part of me, the good, the bad, and the worst, and then freely and honestly smile at me and say nothing has changed. I do not want her to accept me just because something is forcing her to overlook or accept my bad parts. There's no difference between that and loving a puppet. He shrugged and folded his long legs languidly. Of course, I haven't actually fallen in love before, and so it might sound like nothing but a kid's fantasy to you. All I have to go on are stories about how my parents were and stuff. And yet you can still show such maturity, Rias joked with a half smile. I think I just fell a little harder just now. Says the girl who just called herself a beautiful woman just now, she sighed. Why the heavy sigh? Doesn't this feel kinda backwards? Normally it's the guy's role to persuade the girl, isn't it? I'm just that awesome, I suppose. Mo. You're not going to make this easy at all, are you? She pouted at him, but the blonde simply grinned warmly back at her. Would it be worth it if I was? Her heart skipped a beat as a ray of the setting sun shone across his face, and she didn't think it had anything to do with the fact that he literally had holding her heart in his hands. Then someone knocked on the door before it opened to reveal a stoic Grafia standing at attention. She bowed slightly. Uzumaki-san, Rias. The council wishes to talk to you. For the second time in just as many weeks, she found herself dearly wishing she could do something painful to her sister-in-law. Sighing, she looped her arm around Naruto's elbow as he stood up. It's only polite that the gentleman escorts the lady after all, she said impishly. And naturally, I just so happen to be the only gentleman around. The blonde replied lazily, but she noted that he did not make any effort to throw her off. As they passed her sister-in-law, Grafia cocked her head at the two of them with an indescribable expression. I hope you're ready, she said quietly. Naruto paused for a moment. Do you remember what I said that night, Grafia? If she was offended by his refusal to address her with honorifics, she did not show it. Instead, confusion briefly flickered in Grafia's eyes and then she slowly nodded. Then Rias saw him flash the snow-haired lady a rather wide smile filled with fangs while his eyes glinted. Then the real question here, Grafia, is whether you are ready. Breezing past the maid uniform-wearing queen, Naruto pushed the large doors before them open with one hand. And then spinning around, he gave her a mock bow with an impish smile on his lips. After you, my lady. Rias shot him a dry look before she schooled her expression into one of careful indifference and entered. As he followed her in, his eyes took a quick spin around the oblong room and noted that the council had obviously used their magic to completely change the room. He was pretty sure the elevated table at the back of the room where 4 figures sat hadn't been there before, nor had the room been this long. His gaze quickly continued his inspection of the room, briefly noting the line of armored bodyguards that stood at attention on both sides of the walkway leading up the table before his gaze landed on the 4 figures and he frowned slightly. This could get complicated. Judging by the slight gasp coming from Rias, she was about as surprised as he was. Instead, he stepped in front of the girl with blood-red locks when they reached the elevated dais, partially shielding her from their penetrating stares, and bowed slightly, "Lord Gremory, Lord Phoenix, Lord Belial, Lord Lucifer." He greeted each of them with the exact same bow, just low enough to confer respect, but not low enough to make him look like he was beneath them. Behind him, the crimson-haired girl stared incredulously at his back. The blonde didn't seem surprised. Not only that, he had clearly recognized them, though he had neglected to address them by their proper titles. How he had recognized them at all, she had no idea. "I do not believe any of you were originally part of the council." The tall blonde noted dryly as 2 comfortable-looking chairs appeared behind them. Given who the participants were, was there not an issue of impartiality? The 3 older men at the table merely looked mildly amused at his insinuation, while Sirzechs winked cheerfully while a stiff-backed Grafia stood stiff somewhere to his left. They were obviously uncomfortable about making a judgment given the unique circumstances. And since we were in attendance, they decided to defer the honor of making final judgment to us. The tall man with slightly graying blonde hair replied wryly, "I'm sure you can agree that the circumstances require a bit of a special touch?" The Uzumaki returned his wry smirk with one of his own, then gracefully took a seat as Rias did the same. Calmly, he snapped open pocket watch he had retrieved from his pocket and glanced at it briefly before slipping it back inside his breast pocket. "In other words, the 4 of you are here to judge me for deceiving you regarding my status as a piece?" The older man with a long bright red ponytail rolled his shoulders. "It's the law, I suppose. It explicitly states that only pieces can join a rating game, and like you have just admitted, you are not one." Sirzechs leaned forward. "It would be easily rectified if you just accepted her offer, though." "Not very likely." Naruto instantly replied with a silky tone of voice, "I have a slight problem when it comes to little things like submitting myself to the authority of others. Then the results, as much as I do not like it, are clear." Lord Gremory replied with a mildly disappointed expression, "Lord Phoenix is right in pointing out that the match should have been stopped the moment we found out you were not one of Rias' pieces. Therefore, the entire agreement is invalid and the marriage still stands." "That it does." Naruto nodded with a bland expression, "But before we continue, may I say something?" "And what might that be?" The older man, who was obviously Sirzechs and Rias' father given their resemblance, asked calmly. Naruto pointed a finger at Sirzechs, who had been looking amused the entire time as if he was watching a comedy. "In my defense, he was the one that asked me to pull Razor's head out of his ass. He was also the one that asked me to make it humiliating." The amused smile dropped like a brick and Sirzechs quickly went pale as he felt 2 amused gazes and one not so amused gaze tickling the back of his neck. And then, just to rub it in, Naruto pulled a small black box from his pocket and pressed a button. It instantly began to whir quietly before a voice that unmistakably belonged to Sirzechs rang out from the speaker. "Let's say that hypothetically someone wished to pull Razor's head out of his ass. It would need to be sufficiently flashy, if you understand what I mean. Razor may be an arrogant, despicable lecher, but his overly inflated self-importance is not entirely unwarranted. He is genuinely strong in his own right after all. I can also see the attraction in beating in his face with fists alone just to prove to him that his power is not as invincible as he thinks it is, but to someone as egotistic as him, he would not be able to accept it. He would only see it as cheating and perhaps use his influence to override the results of the match. So anything this hypothetical person would need to do, would have to be rather ostentatious. Exactly why? Are you carrying a recorder with you?" Sirzechs asked in a strangled tone as he felt the stares intensify while Naruto calmly tucked the recorder back in his pocket. "For fun, obviously." "This is fun?" "Yes." Naruto shot him what could only be described as a massive shit-eating grin. "You're a bastard. You know that, right?" "I'm not a bastard," the blonde in front of him replied with a flamboyant wave of the hand. "I'm the bastard." A polite cough sounded from his right. "Ah, Lord Phoenix. If it means anything, I didn't think he'd take my suggestion quite so literally." "I'm sure you didn't, Lucifer-sama. But do you mind if we talk for a while? In private?" Sirzechs winced slightly. "As you wish, Lord Phoenix." Beside Phoenix, the 2 other men were obviously having problems keeping up a straight face. Even Grafia's lips had cracked slightly as she pointedly ignored his pleading stares. Rias pursed her lips as the awkward silence stretched in the room, broken only by the occasional thud and light scuffling coming from the small chamber that was apparently connected to the main chamber. Naruto? I don't really want to know. But why are you sniffing the air? Can't you smell it? Smell what? Naruto drew in a deep breath and exhaled again with a dreamy smile. The smell of revenge and suffering. Rias closed her eyes and tried to draw a deep, calming breath. It wasn't working. It smells like freshly steamed daisies. Off to the side, she could hear one of the bodyguards rattling in his armor, obviously trying to stop himself from giggling like a little girl. I love freshly steamed daisies. The first thing I'm going to do when I get out of here is find you some professional help. The blonde stopped sniffing the air and tilted his head thoughtfully. Instead of doing that, why don't you just give me that money instead and I'll stop talking about boy nipples whenever you glance at me when you think I'm not looking. Rias flushed. He had noticed? Wait. What? You did it on purpose? Did you know that your nose tends to scrunch up whenever you're confused? She buried her face in her hands and simply gave up at that point. It's hilariously adorable and adorably hilarious. My brother was right, Rias mumbled to herself through the gap in her fingers. You can be such a bastard sometimes. The bastard. Naruto considered himself lucky that the Lord Phoenix and Sirzechs chose that exact time to come back into the room, both of them looking distinctly ruffled while Sirzechs was sporting a nice shiny new black eye, mostly because he figured he was about to die painfully if the way his friend was glaring at him was any indication. Clearing his throat with an awkward cough, the Lord Phoenix pretended to inspect the documents in front of him, more out of a wish to hide his embarrassment rather than any real need to, either way, whether or not Lucifer-sama was the one to ask. Bam, for the love of. Overall, Naruto felt that he did very well to hide his amusement as the man with the graying blonde hair tried and failed to maintain his composure as the meeting was interrupted once more. What is it now? His answer came in the form of the door exploding inwards, showering those closest to the flimsy wooden panels with chips of wood before a booming figure practically burst through with a loud, boisterous laugh. Uzumaki. I found you. He leapt forwards with surprising speed and brought his fist down on the comparatively small head of blonde hair. There was a massive bang and a small yelp as the Uzumaki simultaneously kicked her chair away from him, sending both of them veering away from the fist as it collided on the carpeted floor and blasted through it. Taking advantage of the larger man's surprise at his sudden move, Naruto leapt forward and wrapped one arm around the large man's neck and popped something into his roaring mouth. His expression didn't budge an inch as he clamped down on the struggling bear of a man's neck and his other hand covered on the man's mouth, as if it was something that happened all the time. Stefan? Razor's father practically yelped as he stared at the two of them. In hindsight, Naruto figured they must have made a rather interesting sight, a slender young man, trying and somehow succeeding to keep the massive bucking man who seemed nearly 3 times as large as him in a headlock. The man's fist alone was more than enough to hold his entire head in it, and then crush it like a grape. Naruto tightened his headlock. Just in case. Slowly, the man in his grip began to weaken and his eyes began to roll up into his head as his mouth started foaming. The moment the mountain of a man spasming stopped entirely, he dropped the man like he was a scalding rock. There was a slight cloud of dust as the man's body hit the ground with a huge thud. Absent-mindedly tapping the ground with one foot, he slouched into the plain stone throne that rumbled out of the ground and folded his hands. Then he tilted his head at the dumbfounded looks he was getting. What? Rias' father, who looked like he was desperately trying not to laugh, bit down on his lips. Uzumaki-san. Are you aware of exactly who that is? Unfortunately, yes. The blonde replied carelessly as he crossed his legs and then audaciously placed his heels on the back of the man's head. Stefan Citri, father of Sarafal Leviathan, Sona Citri, an all-round pain in the ass. He gestured at the man who was still foaming at the mouth. Don't mind him, the poison I gave him isn't lethal. I think. You think? Rias muttered. He smiled pleasantly at her. I haven't finished testing it yet, but it worked fairly well on Razor. Then again, Stefan isn't a phoenix, so he'll probably just wake up in an hour or two. Or he might die. Naruto shrugged lazily. I don't really care which. Everyone stared at him. Except Rias' father. The man seemed to vibrating in his seat for some reason. He waved his hand at them. Hello? Can we get on with it? I'm kinda busy with something at the moment. All things considered, Razor's father did exceptionally well at ignoring the man who was currently foaming at the mouth with his blank fish eyes staring out at nothing. Maybe it had something to do with being a devil, Naruto mused to himself. He drew a deep breath, and then opened his mouth to speak, but not before looking around violently as if he was expecting something else to jump in and disturb his well-prepared speech. As I was saying before I interrupted, whether or not Lucifer-sama was the one to ask you to do it, it does not change the fact that you did not have the right to do it in a raiding game. It was against the rules, plain and simple. I see. The Uzumaki simply placed the tips of his fingers together pensively. Is there nothing I can do to make you change your mind? This is just a simple marriage contract between two families after all. I do not think it's that hard to void it if you agree. That may be so. The man agreed solemnly. If you were not there, if you had not participated, and Rias had won the match as per the agreement between her and Razor, I would not have a problem with listening to her request. But the law must be upheld. And there is nothing at all that I can say to change your mind? None at all. Play skillet, monster. I suppose I should have expected that from you, Ravel Phoenix. The blonde smiled thinly, 34th head of the House of Phoenix and currently a rather prominent member of the Devil's Parliament. Known for your infamously staunch stance on the rule of law, something of a trait among most of the Phoenix family I suppose, given how your father and grandfather were the some of the first people to directly challenge the original Satans at the cost of their own lives. Known to be perfectly fair, but merciless when someone puts even one step out of line. Similarly, even though the Phoenix line is blessed with massive reserves of energy, very few of you actually fight on a battlefield, preferring to fight a war fought with words and paper instead. He glanced at the middle-aged man who was sitting on the Phoenix's right side, who had barely said a word the entire time, simply watching with the eyes of a hawk. DxD Belial. One of the oldest devils still alive and one of the first few to oppose the four original Satans, forming your own moderate faction. It is well known that many of your comrades are currently part of the existing parliament. However, you yourself resigned immediately after you had to kill your own great-grandfather, the one known as Belial, in a battle that supposedly lasted 50 years and never took an active role in Parliament yourself. Similarly, when the raiding game was introduced, you were one of the first few to openly support it. Your battles were near legendary, but shortly after achieving the rank of Emperor, you have not fought in an official match until this very day, mostly because no one has dared to challenge you in nearly 2 centuries. The man simply gave him a weary smile and nodded his head. He turned his gaze on the last member of the trio. Surprisingly enough, you were the hardest to get any information on, Halifax Gremory. The current head of House Gremory beamed at him. And what did you get? Not much, the blonde admitted, only that you were once a part of a trio called the Devil Kings, I believe. All 3 of you were only ones that ever managed to come close to matching DxD over there in the Great War, despite not having any particularly unique abilities yourself. You are also the only noble who has completely mastered every demonic art in existence. Perhaps just as famous, or infamous depending on whom you're asking, was your peculiar habit of being discovered in your enemies' beds. Along with their wives or lovers. The man grinned brightly. At least until you married Venelena Bale, that is. After that, you stopped fighting, not even in raiding games, although you have your own peerage. You regularly insist that they are your harem members, but you have never visited their bed. Naruto inclined his head at the man. Christabel, your rook, asked me to send you her regards. She also asked me to tell you that she's still waiting. The man's eyes darted from the blonde to the pocket watch that he kept fiddling with, and his eyes widened a little before his grin turned a little forced. I spent 98 years on my knees for Venelena. They were the best 98 years of my life, and I have no intention of changing that. The blonde did not say anything. Instead, he glanced at the snowy-haired woman standing in a corner. Graphia Gremory, formerly Lucifuge. Known as the Absolute Queen due to your preference for freezing your enemies in absolute zero ice. Also known as the Queen of Betrayal in certain circles. The woman stiffened but otherwise showed no other reaction on her icy visage. Internally, she felt a sinking feeling as she recalled the boy's question to her shortly before they had entered these chambers. Her past was not something she liked to bring up, and given what the Uzumaki had just done, she had little doubt that he was about to demolish her reputation. Incidentally, the novelized version of Your Love Life with Lucifer over there is currently one of the most popular books on the market and a favorite for young women, particularly the ones who are stuck in arranged marriages. You should also expect a visit from a representative of Ani Shoten sometime next month. They're planning on making a drama from it. Graphia blinked. What was he talking about the drama for? Oh. She discreetly shot him a weak but grateful smile that he acknowledged with a tiny, almost unnoticeable nod. Ravel Phoenix glanced down at the documents. Then, surprising everybody, he tore out the piece of paper containing Naruto Uzumaki's profile and crumpled it up before chucking it in a corner. So you investigated all of us. I do not see how that changes anything. You are still in abeyance of the law. Instead of replying, Naruto held up a hand with a thin yet dangerous smile as he glanced at his watch. Please be patient. Everything will become clear in just a moment. At that exact moment, a blond young man wearing the livery of House Phoenix rushed through the destroyed doors, his face pale and withdrawn even as sweat poured down his temples. Ma master. Ravel shot up. Luca? What's wrong? Why are you here? The mistress. The boy, who seemed no older than 17, panted. No, not only her, everyone in the mansion. They've all fallen ill. None of our tears are working. Not even the doctors know what is happening. His eyes instantly shot towards the smirking Uzumaki. What is the meaning of this, Uzumaki? It's quite simple actually. The boy replied quietly as he leaned in his throne with a sly smile. I did not think the matter would be resolved quite so easily. After all, even if Rias had won fair and square, there was always a chance that you would not agree since Razor has no power to change the conditions to a contract by himself. This is simply insurance in case that happens. Insurance? Is that what they're calling blackmail nowadays? The man countered angrily. I'm going to tell you what I told Grafia when she tried to threaten me as well. The blonde leaned forward with a killer's smile. His voice was nothing more than a deadly whisper. I do not care what you do. I do not care if you punish Rias for disobeying her family. I don't even care if you expel her from the family for disobeying this contract. But if you decide to take away her ability to make her own choice, to choose her own path, I'm going to give you something a lot more troublesome to worry about than just one young girl. Namely myself. Glancing aside, he tried to get some help from the boy's friend, the heir of House Gremory, but it was rather obvious that she was not going to be of any use considering her slightly open mouth and her completely stunned expression. Seeing that he was not going to be getting any help from her, the phoenix leapt forwards with a blazing fist cocked back, his mouth spewing fire and anger. Then he let his fist hurtle forwards. Little by little, the flame-encased fist moved closer to the smiling blonde's face. And then he saw the cold smile on the unconcerned blonde's lips turn absolutely taunting and his fist stopped cold, barely a centimeter away from a tiny crystal vial that seemed to contain a clear bubbling liquid held between Naruto's index finger and his middle finger. This is the only dose of antidote that I managed to make with what little time I had, he whispered quietly. Go ahead. Break it. I might not live long enough to see your face as you watch your family wither away like grass in a desert, but I'm sure your daughter, your sons, your servants, and ultimately your wife will be more than glad to tell me about it when they see me wherever it is devils go to when they die. His fist trembled in sheer hatred and anger. You are not the only one that can make antidotes. I assume you mean our friend Stefan here? The blonde replied coldly as he deliberately tapped Stefan's head with the heel of his polished shoe. The same one I just poisoned less than 20 minutes ago? Ah. Maybe I'm overestimating myself. After all, he is the premier healer in the devil world, isn't he? But can he make one in time? He smirked again, a hateful smirk filled with utter malice that caused the Phoenix Lord to take a step back. After all, I've been slipping them poison for nearly a week now. They have 2 hours, at most, left to live, maybe less. You utter bastard. To poison women and innocent children. Do you not have any honor? Watso? A thick pile of yellow files hit the table before him with a loud smack and scattered onto the table messily. He glared at the Uzumaki who had thrown the documents at him. What are these? Another one of your tricks? Naruto simply made a gesture that he took to mean he should read them first, the smile sliding off his face as his blue orbs went as flat as chips of ice. The moment he opened the first page, he felt the blood drain from his face. 398 instances of Razor purchasing enough drugs to make a whole cave of dragons fuck themselves to death, and at least 200 instances where he lent his pieces out to family friends to curry favor. You will notice that the dates coincide with the dates that he won a match. And that's only what I could find. I have little doubt that is not all. So you can forgive me for not believing for one moment that you would void the agreement just because Rias defeated your son. The boy spoke softly. It was barely a whisper, but they all heard it as clear as day. Please. Do continue telling me about what honor is. I love how absolutely hypocritical it sounds. How do I know these aren't lies? He asked, a tiny quaver in his voice. If these documents got out. Maybe they are. And maybe they aren't. The blonde replied silkily, his voice was as quiet as it was deadly, but the real question here is whether you are willing to take the chance they are not real. He leaned back in his seat with a satisfied smile. Are you willing to gamble the lives of your family on the off chance that I'm telling the truth? Politics was a war after all, just one that was fought with words and paper instead of weapons and techniques. And he had grown up at the lap of one of the most brilliant political minds of his age. He had grown up watching a man who had kept an entire village of superpowered assassins under control with nothing but mere words alone. He had grown up under the watchful eye of a man who had kept the peace, no matter how fragile it had been, between 4 other similar villages. He had grown up beside the man known as the God of Shinobi. The old man had his flaws, but these devils had nothing on the old man. And the man in front of him was a bureaucrat in every sense of the word. You are in a room with at least 3 other ultimate class devils, each and every one of them are people I consider my friends. He tried again, and you dare to threaten me and my kin? I think it is you that is the one with no choice here. Naruto's eyes glinted mercilessly. Oh, I know that. The hand holding the vial was suddenly engulfed in black flames that crept dangerously close to the vial of liquid. He glanced at the three of them sharply. All of them had the same tense and wary expression. Come, show me how powerful an ultimate class devil is supposed to be. And I'll show you exactly how many fucks I give about it. He said silkily. Please. Uzumaki-san. The Phoenix seemed to try another method. The rules are there for a reason. If we flaunt them whenever we like, then we would be no better than our predecessors. Mindless, violent beasts that would have driven an entire species into extinction just to satisfy their base urges. I know. I just don't care. The blonde extinguished the flame and languidly pocketed the vial. Then he pulled out another scroll that he offered to the apprehensive Phoenix. What? What is that? Dread filled him as he stared at the scroll like it was a particularly poisonous snake. My conditions. The blonde replied with a pleasant smile that did nothing to soften his chilly gaze. I want you to sign it. Unrolling the scroll, Ravel quickly scanned the elegantly cursive writing on the yellow paper and he slowly collapsed back into his chair. This. Do you realize what you're asking me to do? Oh, I know perfectly well. I want you to sign your life over to me. Or more specifically, I want you to sign every asset the Phoenix owns, all your gold, your clothes, and even your goddamn dog. A thick malicious miasma began to leak out from the blonde's presence. All around the room, the knights began to buckle one by one as they felt the killing intent leaking from him. One of the maids began to scream and thrash on the ground, bashing her head against the wall as the thick, fear-inducing mist began to seep through her orifices until some of the knights that were still somewhat clear-minded dragged her away from the blonde's presence, kicking and screaming. All through that, the blonde's killer smile never budged an inch. Closing his eyes, Ravel signed the document as quick as he could as if hoping to get it over with as fast as possible. He swallowed thickly. You're a madman. This is nothing more than daylight robbery. No, it is not. If I wanted to rob you, I would not be wasting my time talking to you. You would already be dead before you knew it. Naruto lazily propped himself up on his fist, his bloodthirsty grin widened even as the miasma thickened. This is not blackmail, because if I was blackmailing you, you would not have been given the chance to disagree with me at all. This is not negotiating, because quite frankly, I do not like you enough to waste my time negotiating with you. No, my friend. This is me making a point. He waved the scroll around lazily. You see, Ravel. I am a relatively simple man. You leave me alone, this scroll and those documents stays nice and safe where no one will ever see them. You go back on your words and threaten me or my friends, and I will not stop at just breaking you physically. But I won't kill you, not just yet. I will rip your family from you. I will make you watch as I destroy your reputation until the name Phoenix is synonymous with mud. I will make you castrate your own sons with a blunt spoon. I will make you watch as your daughter whores her body out to the highest bidder. I will make you break yourself as your wife commits suicide. I will not stop until I have taken everything from you. The monster smiled warmly. Then, and only then, Ravel, will you have my permission to die.